The barn door splintered under a boot not meant for breaking wood. Ethan Walker had swung his weight into it with the full force of 41 years of hard living, the shotgun cradled in the crook of his arm and the rain driving so thick he could barely see the far wall. 3 nights in a row something had been raiding his feed bins. He figured a coyote or maybe a stray dog, but the tracks he'd found at dawn were too small for either. Too deliberate. The kind of tracks that belonged to something that walked on 2 legs and had the sense to hide its face. He didn't call out this time. He wanted the element of surprise, the split second of terror that would freeze whatever it was long enough for him to size it up. The lantern hooked to his belt swung wild as he pushed through the cracked doorway, throwing yellow light across wet hay and the dark hulks of stacked bales. The horses in their stalls beyond the partition stamped and blew, nervous at the intrusion. Ethan leveled the shotgun into the gloom. That's when he heard it. A breath. Soft and quick, the kind of breath a person takes when they're trying not to be heard. Not a coyote, not a dog, a person. He lowered the barrel a hair. "Come on out now. I ain't gonna hurt you. Just show yourself so we can talk this through." Silence. The rain hammered the roof like judgment. Then something moved behind the tallest bale near the back wall. A small shadow. Then another, smaller still. Ethan's heart climbed into his throat. "Come on, friend. I just want to see who's there." What stepped into the lantern light was a girl. Thin as a fence rail, hair plastered to her scalp with mud and straw, barefoot in the cold dirt. She wore a dress that had once been calico but was now mostly rags, hanging off one shoulder where the seam had torn. And in her trembling fist she held a rusted screwdriver. The point of it aimed straight at his chest, like it was a cavalry saber, and she was the last soldier standing. "You stay back," she said. Her voice was cracked, dry, but it didn't waver. It had the flat certainty of someone who had already made peace with dying. "You stay right where you are, mister." Ethan stopped. He set the shotgun down in the mud, slow and deliberate, and took 2 long steps backward. "All right, I'm staying. See? I'm putting it down. I'm stepping away. That's me unarmed, miss. That's me, harmless as a man can be." Her eyes flicked to the gun, back to him, back to the gun. The screwdriver wavered a fraction. "Don't call me miss." "What do I call you then?" She didn't answer. But behind her, from the hollow between the bales, came a small, strangled whimper. The kind of sound a child makes when they've been crying so long they've forgotten how to stop. The girl flinched, her jaw tightened. "How many are you?" Ethan asked softly. "That ain't your business." "No, ma'am, I reckon it ain't, but it's storming sideways out there, and whoever's hiding behind you sounds like they ain't but a baby. I'd be a poor sort of Christian to leave a baby in a wet barn through the night." She stared at him. The rain dripped off the brim of his hat. The horses stamped. The whimper came again, louder this time, and the girl's face cracked open just a sliver. "3," she whispered. "There's 3 of us." Before we go any further into Lily's story, I want to ask you something from the bottom of my heart. If you believe a child should never be thrown away, hit that subscribe button right now and tell me what city you're watching from today. I want to see how far this little Texas storm has traveled tonight. Stay right here with me clear to the very end, because what happens to Lily Burke and her brother and sister is going to stay with you for the rest of your living days. Ethan nodded slow. 3 is a number I can work with. My name's Ethan Walker. This here's my ranch. I've been living on it 12 years. I ain't never raised a hand to a child in my life, and I ain't starting tonight. The girl didn't lower the screwdriver, but her chin trembled once. "We ain't going with you. I didn't ask you to. This barn is mine, but it ain't worth a hill of beans tonight if there's children freezing in it. You stay long as you need. I'll bring blankets and bread. I'll set 'em by the door and walk back to the house. You don't have to come within 10 feet of me if that's how you want it." Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Everybody lies," she said, but her voice had lost its edge. "Not everybody, ma'am." "I said don't call me ma'am. Then tell me your name." She bit her lip hard enough to draw a bead of blood. Then, so quiet he almost missed it. "Lily." He said it gentle, like he was setting it down on a shelf where nothing could break it. "Lily, I'm Ethan. Now you got a brother and sister back there. What are their names?" She didn't answer. From the darkness came a thin, wet voice, a boy's voice, maybe 5 or 6. "Lily, I'm cold." Lily flinched. "Hush, Noah. Hush now, baby, I got you." "My belly hurts." "I know it, sugar, I know." Ethan felt something twist in his chest so hard he had to swallow twice before he could speak. "Lily, there's a pot of stew on my stove, been simmering since supper. There's biscuits in the warmer and milk in the spring house, and a fire so hot you could dry a soaked dog in 20 minutes flat. And there's 3 beds upstairs that ain't been slept in since my wife passed." Her face did something then. A crack, a fissure in the armor she'd built around herself. "Mr. Ethan, we can't go in your house." "Why not?" "Because if he finds us in a house, he'll know it's us. He'll know somebody took us in." "Who?" She shook her head violently. The screwdriver came back up. "Don't ask me that. Don't you ever ask me that." "All right, Lily, I won't ask. Not tonight." "Not ever if you don't want me to." "Swear it." "I swear it on my wife's name, and there ain't nothing I hold dearer." The screwdriver lowered inch by inch. Then Lily Burke, 13 years old and tired clear through to the bone, looked at the man kneeling in the hay dust of his own barn and said the first true thing she'd said in months. "Noah's 6, Emma's 9. They ain't ate but stolen apples for 3 days. Emma's running a fever, and Noah ain't stopped shivering since the rain started." Her voice cracked on the last word. "Please don't be lying, mister, please. I can't be wrong about you, I can't." Ethan took his hat off. He held it against his chest the way he'd held it standing over his wife's grave 9 years back. "Lily, I ain't lying to you. Nobody's hurting you here. Not tonight, not tomorrow. Not so long as I got breath in this body of mine. Now, you bring those babies out and let me get you warm before that fever takes your sister somewhere I can't fetch her back." She made a sound. Not a sob exactly. It was the sound a dam makes when the first stone slips loose. She turned her head. "Emma," she whispered. "Come on out, baby. Come on." "Bring Noah." From the dark hollow between the bales, 2 small figures shuffled forward. The girl, Emma, had hair like wet straw and a face so white her freckles stood out like ink dots. She clutched a little boy against her hip the way a mother holds an infant. And the boy, Noah, had his face buried in her shoulder and his thumb in his mouth. When he looked up and saw Ethan, he didn't scream. He just stared with big brown eyes that held more fear than a child's eyes should ever hold. "Are you the man?" he asked. "What man, son? The man who's going to take us back?" Ethan's jaw locked so tight he could feel his molars grinding. "No, son, I ain't that man, and I ain't ever going to be that man." Noah considered this very seriously. Then he pulled his thumb out of his mouth and held out his free hand the way a child does when he wants to be carried. "I'm tired, mister." Lily made a strangled noise. Ethan didn't look at her. He stepped forward, slow, careful as a man approaching a foal that's never been touched, and he bent down and lifted Noah into his arms. The boy weighed nothing, less than nothing. Ethan had hauled sacks of feed twice the weight without thinking. "Sweet, merciful Father," he muttered, and his voice broke clear through the middle. "Don't drop him," Lily said. She was crying now openly, the screwdriver dangling forgotten between her fingers. "Don't you drop my brother." "I ain't gonna drop him, Lily. I ain't never gonna drop him." He shifted Noah against his shoulder and reached his free hand out to Emma. She stared at his palm like she'd never seen one offered to her before. "Come on, sugar, let's get you warm." Emma slipped her tiny fingers into his. Lily came last, dragging her feet through the hay. The screwdriver clutched against her chest like she still needed it just in case. Ethan didn't tell her to drop it. He didn't tell her she was safe. He'd already said it once, and people who'd been lied to all their lives didn't need to hear a thing twice to know it was true. They needed to be shown. The rain hit them like buckshot as they crossed the yard, but Noah didn't cry. He pressed his face into Ethan's neck and gripped a fistful of the rancher's coat collar and held on with a grip that didn't belong on a 6-year-old. Emma clung to Ethan's hand so tight he could feel the bones of her fingers. Lily walked behind them, head down, screwdriver still in her fist. When Ethan kicked his back door open and they tumbled into the kitchen, the warmth of the hearth hit them like a wall, and Noah whimpered against his neck and started to cry. Not loud the way a child should cry, but quiet and steady, the way grown men cry at funerals. "All right," Ethan said. "All right now, son. You're inside. You're inside." He set Noah down on the rag rug in front of the fire. Emma sank down beside him without being told. Lily stood in the doorway like she was waiting for the trap to spring. "Come in, Lily. He'll see the smoke. It's storming too hard for anybody to be looking for smoke tonight. Come in." She came in. She didn't sit by the fire. She sat at the kitchen table where she could see the door and the window both. And she set the screwdriver on the wood in front of her, point aimed toward the hallway. Ethan didn't comment on it. He ladled stew into bowls, 3 of them. He set them on the rug in front of Noah and Emma, and a 4th on the table for Lily. And he stood back and watched what happened next. Emma picked up her spoon. She lifted 1 bite. Then she froze, the spoon halfway to her mouth, and she looked up at Ethan with eyes the size of saucers. Is it for me?" "It's for you, sugar, all of it. And when you finish, there's more." She started to cry, a real cry, a child's cry. Big tears rolling down her cheeks while she ate, spoon shoveling fast like somebody might snatch the bowl away. "Slow, sugar, slow. It ain't going nowhere. Slow now, or you'll make yourself sick." Noah was already eating. He had stew in his hair somehow. He didn't seem to know or care. At the table, Lily sat with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes on the bowl. "Lily, pick up that spoon." "I ain't hungry." "Lily, if you don't eat that stew, those 2 on the rug are going to stop eating theirs to worry about you. That ain't fair to them or to me. Now you pick up that spoon." Her jaw clenched. For a second he thought she was going to fight him. Then her shoulders sagged and she picked up the spoon, and she ate slow, mechanical, 1 bite at a time, like she was paying a debt. When the bowls were empty, he heated more milk. He fetched towels from the linen press and laid them in a folded pile by the fire. He climbed the stairs to the room that had been meant for his daughter, the daughter who'd never been born, who died in her mother's belly during the same fever that took his wife. He opened the cedar chest at the foot of the bed and pulled out the little clothes his wife had sewn 9 years ago. He brought them downstairs. Emma was asleep against Noah's shoulder. Noah was asleep against the rag rug. Lily was watching him. "What's all that?" she asked. "Clothes, dry ones. My wife made them for our baby. They'll fit Emma if I cut the hem. The nightshirt will wrap Noah twice. There's a sweater in here that'll fit you, I reckon. Why do you have children's clothes?" He set the pile down on the chair. He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was thin but didn't break. "My wife was carrying our daughter when the fever came through. We lost them both inside a week. I sewed up that chest the day after the burials and ain't opened it in 9 years until tonight." Lily said nothing. The fire popped. "I'm sorry, mister." "Don't be sorry, Lily. Don't be sorry for a thing. Them clothes been waiting for somebody to need them." "I reckon they've been waiting for you 3. She stared at him a long time. "You really ain't going to ask?" "Ask what?" "Where we come from, who we're running from, what he did." "Not tonight. Tonight you need to eat and sleep and be warm. There'll be time for the rest. The story ain't going nowhere, Lily. It'll keep till morning." She looked down at the screwdriver. Slowly, very slowly, she pushed it away from herself. Not far, just an inch, just enough that her hand wasn't on it anymore. "My mama died last fall," she said. Ethan didn't speak. "She had the cancer. She fought it a long time. And after she went, my stepdaddy, he changed. You don't have to tell me." "I know I don't. But if I don't say it now, I'm going to lose my nerve. And I need you to know what's coming. He'll come, mister. When he finds out where we are, he'll come." "Let him come." She shook her head. "You don't know him. I lived in this country 41 years. I know exactly what kind of man drives babies into a stranger's barn in the middle of a Texas storm. And I am telling you plain as a man can tell a thing. If he sets foot on this land, he is going to wish to God he hadn't." She didn't cry. She just nodded once, slow, like a soldier acknowledging an order, and then she leaned her head against the kitchen table and closed her eyes. 10 minutes, she murmured. "I just need 10 minutes. You sleep. I'll watch the door. Somebody's got to." "Somebody is. Me." "Mister?" "Ethan." "Ethan." "Yeah, sweetheart. If you're lying, I ain't. If you are, I ain't, Lily." Her breath hitched. "Promise me one more time." He sat down across from her at the table. He pulled the screwdriver out of reach and set it on the windowsill behind him, gentle as if it were made of glass. Then he leaned his forearms on the wood and looked her dead in the eye. "Lily, I swear to you on my wife's grave, on my daughter's empty cradle upstairs, on every drop of blood in this old broken body of mine, nobody is hurting you here. Not tonight. Not ever. You understand me?" She nodded, and then finally she let her head down on her arms. She was asleep before her cheek touched the wood. Ethan sat there a long time in the quiet. The fire popped. The rain hammered the roof. Noah's breathing was steady and slow against the rag rug, and Emma's little arm was thrown over his chest like she was guarding him even in her sleep. 3 children in his kitchen, where there hadn't been a child's voice in 9 long years. He pressed his face into his hands. When he lifted his head, his eyes were wet, but his jaw was set. He rose. He fetched the quilt from the parlor, his wife's quilt, the one she'd been making the week she died, finished by his own clumsy hands the winter after the burial, and laid it gentle over Noah and Emma. He draped a smaller blanket over Lily's shoulders at the table. He walked to the back door and threw the bolt. He walked to the front door and threw that one too. He took down his daddy's old Winchester from above the mantel, the one he hadn't fired in 6 years, checked the action and the chamber, and laid it across his knees as he sank into the rocking chair by the fire. He didn't sleep. He watched the door. He watched the window. He listened to the breathing of 3 children who, for the first time in months, were sleeping deep enough to dream. The dawn came creeping gray under the kitchen curtains. The storm rolled off east toward Louisiana. The first rooster crowed somewhere down the road past the McAllister place. Ethan Walker looked at the 3 small bodies asleep in his house and reckoned that he would burn this whole ranch to the ground before he let a single one of them be heard again. The kettle was singing on the stove when he heard the scream. It came from the rug. Noah sat bolt upright, his eyes wide and unblinking, and the scream coming out of him wasn't a child's cry. It was something older, animal. Lily's head snapped up. She was at his side in 3 steps. "Noah, baby, look at me, look at me." The boy didn't see her. His eyes were looking through her. "He's still in it," Lily said. "He gets like this. He don't come back for a spell." "What do I do?" "Don't touch him. Don't ever touch him when he's like this." Noah screamed again. Then his voice broke and he started to sob, a deep sob that came from a body that's forgotten how to do anything else. Emma sat up and wrapped both arms around her brother without saying a word. "He's all right," she whispered into his hair. "He's all right, Noah. We're at the man's house, the barn man. Remember?" Noah blinked. He looked at his sister. He looked at Lily. He looked at Ethan standing frozen with a skillet in his hand. And in a voice so small it nearly broke clean in half, he said, "I forgot." "Forgot what, sugar?" Lily asked. "That we got away." That did it. Ethan turned back to the stove, because if he didn't, he was going to do something a grown man oughtn't do in front of children. And that something was weep. He cracked another egg. He stirred the skillet. He spoke without turning. "Y'all eat eggs?" 3 voices answered at once. "Yes, mister." "Yes, sir." "Yes." During breakfast, Emma told him she thought she had a fever. He felt her forehead, hot. He carried her upstairs to his own bed and dressed her in one of Annabelle's nightshirts, the one with yellow daisies on the collar. She touched the embroidery. "Did your wife make these?" "She did." "What was her name?" He swallowed. "Annabelle. That's a pretty name. Annabelle would have let us stay too, wouldn't she?" His voice cracked. "She would have, sugar. She'd have set you on her lap and read to you till she lost her voice." Emma smiled and was asleep within the minute. Downstairs, Noah had crawled into the rocking chair with the quilt pulled to his chin, watching Lily wash the breakfast plates. Ethan stood in the doorway. "You don't have to do that." "I want to. You're a guest in this house. Guests don't show up uninvited and stay." "Then what are you?" She didn't answer. "Lily? I don't know how to be a guest. Everything in the world is something you earn. Food, roof, being left alone. Not here. You say that now. I'll say it tomorrow too. And the day after." She turned finally. "And the day after that. And every day after that." She didn't believe him. He could see it in the set of her mouth. Words wouldn't move a thing in a heart that's scarred. He just walked past her and refilled the kettle. The rain kept through that whole second day. By sundown, the creek had jumped its banks. Ethan rode out in the wet to drive his stock to high ground. When he came back, Lily met him at the door with a towel. "I built up the fire." "I see that. Emma's fever's down some." "That's good news. Noah ate 2 biscuits while you was out." "You did right." She handed him the towel and watched him dry his face. "Mister." "Ethan, there's something I gotta tell you before you go to bed tonight." He hung the towel on the peg. "Say it." "Not here, out on the porch." She closed the door soft behind them. She wrapped her thin arms around herself against the wet air and didn't look at him when she spoke. "My stepdaddy's name is Raymond. He weren't always like he is now. He was a railroad man out of Fort Worth. He courted my mama proper for near 2 years before she said yes. He was kind to us at first. He learned Noah his letters. He'd bring Emma ribbons from town. What changed him? He lost his job, started drinking, then betting the rent money on horses. Then Mama got sick. After she went, he sat at the kitchen table for 6 days straight and drank. On the 7th day, he hit Emma so hard she didn't hear right out of one ear for a week. He hit me the next time I tried to stop him. Then it got regular." Her voice was flat as a board. "2 weeks ago, he come home with a man I never seen before, a traveler. Said he was passing through to Galveston. Said he was looking for boys to work the docks. Said he'd pay $40 cash for a strong one." Ethan went cold all the way through. Raymond pointed at Noah, said he was 6 but small for his age, and the man could have him for 30. The man said he'd think on it, said he'd come back at the end of the month. And then? Then Raymond told me that come Sunday next, he was taking me into town to meet a widower named Henderson out by Lubbock. Said Henderson had buried 2 wives already, but was looking for a young one. Said I was nearly 14, and that was old enough by Texas law. Said I'd fetch him $50 sure. The porch was quiet. Somewhere off in the wet dark, a coyote called. That night I packed everything Emma and Noah and me could carry in a flour sack. I waited till Raymond passed out. I took $20 out of his coat pocket, and the kitchen knife, and my mama's wedding ring out of the dresser. And we walked. We walked for 9 days. She told him about the chicken coop, the church, the apples from a Quaker orchard. About Emma getting sick and Raymond almost catching them outside Beaumont. About running across 3 counties, sleeping in his barn because it was the only one she could find without a dog. "I'm so tired, Ethan." He pulled her against him. She fought it for half a second, then went into his coat like a barn cat into the warm. "I'm so tired I can't think straight no more." "You don't have to think. I'm thinking for the 4 of us now." "You hardly know us." "I know enough," she cried then, quiet against his shirt. He stood there in the rain off the eaves and held her, and didn't say another word for a long time. When she finally pulled back, she wiped her nose on her sleeve. "You said your wife was named Annabelle." "I did." "Tell me about her sometime when I ain't so tired." "I will, sweetheart." She went inside. He stood on the porch alone a minute longer. Then he walked to the barn where less than a day before he'd kicked the door off the hinge. He stood in the dark where the children had hidden. He put both hands flat on the hay bale where Lily had been crouched with a screwdriver in her fist, and made a sound that wasn't a word, something between a vow and a verdict. The next morning, Emma's fever broke. She came downstairs barefoot in Annabelle's nightshirt and stood in the kitchen doorway watching Ethan slice ham. "Mister?" "Yeah, sugar." "Lily said I could ask you something." "Ask away." "Could I name the chickens?" He set the knife down. "Ma'am, you can name every blessed thing on this property." Emma's whole face lit up. "Even the cow?" "Even the cow." "Even the rooster that goes off at 4 in the morning?" "That rooster especially." She ran out the back door barefoot. Noah pulled his thumb out of his mouth. "Can I help her?" "Go on." The boy was up and out before Ethan could draw a second breath. Lily came down a minute later with her hair washed and braided, wearing one of Annabelle's shirts cinched with twine. She stopped in the doorway and watched her brother and sister chasing a brown hen across the yard. "He's running," she said. "Noah's running. He ain't run since Mama died. He won't run, not even for fun." "He's running now, Lily." She stood there a long moment, and Ethan saw the exact second something come loose in her. She lifted both hands to cover her mouth. "Oh," she said behind her fingers. "Oh." She turned and walked back upstairs without another word. Ethan stood at the kitchen window and watched Emma name the chickens. Henrietta, Pearl, Miss Boots, Stranger. He watched Noah chase a butterfly across the muddy yard with his arms thrown wide. Then the dog out by the gate started barking. Ethan's hand stopped on the cutting board. The dog never barked for a coyote, not for a deer, not for a wagon, only for a man. A horse came up the road. A black gelding. A rider in a long oilskin coat with his hat pulled low. Ethan reached for the Winchester. "Emma, Noah, in the house, now." The children scattered. The rider pulled up at the gate, didn't holler, didn't dismount. He just sat there and looked up at the porch where Ethan now stood with the rifle in his hands. "Morning, Walker," the rider said. "Sheriff, hell of a storm." "It was. Surprised to find you home this hour. Thought you'd be out moving stock." "Moved 'em yesterday." The sheriff nodded slow. His eyes drifted across the yard, across the chicken coop, across the wet boot prints leading back to the kitchen. 3 sets. 2 of them no bigger than a child's foot. "Walker, I had a man ride in from Beaumont this morning. Says he's missing 3 young'uns. Says they've been seen coming west. Says he's offering $20 apiece for word of 'em." Ethan didn't move. "That a fact?" "That's a fact. I figured I'd ride out neighborly and ask. You seen any children, Walker?" Behind the kitchen window, Lily had pressed Emma and Noah flat against the wall. Ethan could see the top of her head watching him. He looked the sheriff dead in the eye. "Sheriff, I ain't seen a child on this property in 9 years, and you know that better than any man alive." The sheriff held his gaze a long second. Then he tipped his hat. "That's what I figured, Walker. That's just what I figured." He turned his horse and rode off slow, the way a man rides when he's already made up his mind about a thing. Inside the kitchen, Lily pressed her face into her hands. "He knew," she whispered. "Ethan, he knew." The kitchen door clicked shut behind Ethan as he stepped back inside, the Winchester still warm from his grip. Lily hadn't moved from the window. Her face was pressed against the glass now, watching the sheriff's horse fade into the gray drizzle like a ghost dissolving into morning mist. Her shoulders were drawn up tight around her ears, the way an animal holds itself when it's waiting for the blow to fall. Ethan set the rifle down on the table. The sound of it against the wood made her flinch. Lily. He knew. Her voice was thin as a wire stretched too far. He looked right at the boot prints. He counted them. He knew we was in here, and he rode off anyway. Why? Because he's a good man who made a bad decision last December, and he's trying to figure out how to live with it. He could have taken us. He could have. He didn't. She turned from the window and looked at him with eyes that had seen too many promises broken. Why not? Because I think he's been carrying the weight of that December day ever since. And I think he saw something in my face that told him he'd have to go through me to get to you. And he wasn't willing to do that. Not today. Not ever. Lily didn't answer. She just stood there with her arms wrapped around herself, shivering despite the fire. Emma padded in from the parlor doorway, still in Annabelle's nightshirt, her bare feet silent on the pine boards. "Is the bad man gone?" she asked. Lily's face crumpled. She crossed the room in 3 steps and knelt down in front of her sister, taking both of Emma's small hands in hers. "The bad man is gone, baby. He ain't coming back." Not ever. But the other man on the horse, that was the sheriff. He was just checking on things. He's gone now too. Is the sheriff on our side? Lily looked up at Ethan. He answered from where he stood. "Yes, sugar. The sheriff is on our side. He just took a long road getting there." Emma nodded as if this made perfect sense, then turned and went back to the parlor where a half-finished drawing of a sunflower lay on the floor. Lily stayed on her knees a moment longer, her head bowed. Then she stood up slow, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, and walked to the stove to pour herself a cup of coffee that she didn't drink. She just held it, letting the warmth seep through the tin into her palms, staring out the window at the empty road. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we live. That's all. We live. One day at a time, and we don't let the fear take root deeper than it already has. That sounds easier than it is. I know it does, but it's the only way I know how to do it. The next morning dawned clear and hot, the first real break in the weather in nearly a week. The sun came up over the east pasture like a blowtorch, burning the last of the puddles off the dirt yard and turning the wet hay in the barn to steam. Ethan was up before first light, as he always was, and by the time the children came downstairs, he had biscuits in the oven and bacon in the skillet and a pot of coffee black as axle grease. Noah came down first, still rubbing his eyes, his hair sticking up in 7 different directions. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs and looked around the kitchen like he was still trying to remember where he was. Then his eyes found Ethan at the stove, and some part of him seemed to settle. "Mornin', mister." "Mornin', son. You sleep all right?" "Yes, sir. I had a dream." "What about?" Noah considered this very seriously. "Buttercups," he said. "Just a whole field of them." Ethan smiled, a real smile, the kind that had been rare on his face for the better part of a decade, and set a plate of bacon and biscuits on the table. "Well, that sounds like a fine dream to have. You go on and eat." Emma came down next, still in the nightshirt, her hair in a tangled mess. She walked straight to the table and sat down without a word, but she reached out and touched the edge of Ethan's sleeve as he passed. Just a brush of her fingers, like she needed to make sure he was real. He didn't acknowledge it. He just set a glass of milk in front of her and kept moving. Lily was the last one down. She came slow, her hand trailing along the banister, her eyes scanning the room the way a soldier scans a tree line. She saw Noah eating, saw Emma drinking her milk, saw Ethan at the stove, and something in her face relaxed a fraction of an inch. She sat down at her usual spot at the table, the one with a clear view of both the door and the window. "You sleep?" Ethan asked. "Some. That's more than you got the night before." "I reckon." He set a plate in front of her. She looked at it. She picked up her fork. She ate. It wasn't much, but it was something. The morning passed in a slow rhythm. Ethan went out to check on the stock, and Noah followed him like a shadow, chattering about the calf he'd named Buttercup. Emma stayed inside with Lily, who had found a piece of charcoal from the fireplace and was teaching her sister how to draw a horse on a scrap of barn board. By mid-morning, the sun was high enough to bake the mud into hard, cracked plates, and the air smelled of wet earth and growing things. A wagon came up the river road around 10 o'clock. Ethan saw it from the south pasture, where he was mending a fence post, with Noah handing him nails. He straightened slow, his hand going to the hammer at his belt. But the wagon was familiar, a small buckboard with a faded blue canopy, pulled by a sway-backed mare with a white blaze. It was Mrs. McAllister. She pulled up at the gate and climbed down with the careful grace of a woman who had been climbing down from wagons for 40 years. She carried a basket covered with a checkered cloth. "Mornin', Walker." "Mornin', Mrs. McAllister. Heard you had some visitors." He didn't flinch. "Word travels fast. In this county, it travels on winged feet." She lifted the basket. "Brought you a pie, and some jam, and a few other things I figured you might be short on." She nodded toward the house. "They in there?" "They are." "May I?" He considered it. Mrs. McAllister was the schoolteacher. She had been the one to go to the sheriff last December about the bruises on Lily's neck. She had been the one who had tried and failed, and carried that failure like a stone in her pocket ever since. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "I reckon you may." She walked up to the porch and knocked gentle on the doorframe. It opened a crack, and Lily's face appeared in the gap. Her eyes went wide when she saw who it was. "Mrs. McAllister." "Lily, I heard you was here. I wanted to see for myself." Lily opened the door all the way. She stood there in Annabelle's old shirt, with her braid coming loose, and her hands clasped in front of her, and she looked at the woman who had failed her once, and who had come back anyway. "I'm sorry," Mrs. McAllister said. "I should have done more. I should have pushed harder. I should have gone to the judge myself. I should have—" "You tried. It wasn't enough. It was more than anybody else done." Mrs. McAllister's eyes welled up. She set the basket down on the porch and opened her arms. Lily stood frozen for a long moment. Then she stepped forward and let herself be held. Ethan watched from the pasture fence. Noah was watching too, the nails forgotten in his hand. "Pa?" he said, and then caught himself, his face going red. "I mean, Mr. Ethan." "Is that lady going to take us away?" "No, son. That lady is going to be your school teacher come fall. She's just making sure you're all right." "Oh." Noah went back to sorting nails. Inside, Mrs. McAllister met Emma, who had come out from behind the woodbox to see who was making her sister cry. She met Noah when he came in for lunch, and she sat at the kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee and looked at Lily across the worn pine. "You'll need to enroll in school come September," she said. "Both you and Emma. And Noah when he turns 6, but that ain't till next spring." "I know." "You'll have to tell me what you've missed. I can catch you up." "I know." "And you'll need shoes. And a dress that ain't borrowed. I'll see to it." Lily looked down at her hands. "We ain't got money for shoes." "You don't need money. I've got a closet full of dresses my girls outgrew, and a pair of boots my youngest left behind when she married and moved to San Antonio. They'll fit you fine." "I can't take charity." "It ain't charity, it's community. There's a difference." Lily's jaw worked. She didn't say thank you. She couldn't. The words were stuck somewhere in her throat. But she nodded, and that was enough. Mrs. McAllister stayed for an hour. She helped Lily fold laundry, the few things Ethan had managed to wash and dry. She showed Emma how to hold a paintbrush proper, not like a dagger, but like an extension of her hand. She sat on the floor and let Noah tell her about every single chicken, by name, and she listened like it was the most important story she'd ever heard. Before she left, she pulled Ethan aside on the porch. "Walker, there's something you need to know." "What's that?" "Raymond Burke posted bail yesterday afternoon." His hand tightened on the porch rail. "How do you know that?" "My husband was in town picking up feed. He saw Raymond at the saloon, drinking and talking loud, telling anyone who'd listen that he was going to get his children back, that the court had no right to keep them from him, that he knew where they was and he was coming for them." Ethan stared out at the river road. The sun was high now, burning white and hot. "When?" "My husband said he was already drunk by noon. If he's coming, it'll be soon. Maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow, but he's coming." "Thank you, Mrs. McAllister." "Don't thank me. Just keep those babies safe." She climbed into her wagon and drove off without looking back. Ethan stood on the porch for a long time after she left. He didn't tell Lily what Mrs. McAllister had said. Not yet. He spent the afternoon moving the stock closer to the house. He checked the locks on the doors, the load in the Winchester, the position of the lanterns. He showed Noah how to stack kindling, simple work that kept the boy close and occupied. He watched Lily watching the road. She knew something was wrong. He could see it in the set of her shoulders, the way she kept looking at him sideways. But she didn't ask. Not yet. That evening, after supper, after Emma had fallen asleep on the rag rug with a half-eaten biscuit still in her hand, and Noah had curled up in the rocking chair with the dog at his feet, Lily found Ethan on the back porch. He was sitting on the steps, staring out at the darkening pasture, the Winchester propped beside him. She sat down next to him. Not close enough to touch, but close enough that he could feel her presence. "You're waiting for something," she said. "I'm always waiting for something." That's what ranching is. Waiting for rain, waiting for calves to drop, waiting for fences to break. "You know what I mean." He didn't answer. "Mrs. McAllister told you something this morning. I saw it in your face when you came back in." He let out a long breath. "Raymond posted bail yesterday afternoon." Lily went very still. The only sound was the crickets starting up in the tall grass. "He's gonna come." "He might." "No, he's gonna come. I know him. He's got that mean in him that don't let go. He'll come drunk, and he'll come angry, and he'll come with a gun. Let him. You don't understand. He's not like other men. He don't see reason. He don't feel fear like normal folks do. He just gets meaner and meaner until something breaks. I've seen mean men before, Lily. Not like him." She was shaking now, her hands clasped so tight in her lap that the knuckles were white. "He hurt Emma. He hurt her bad. And Noah still has nightmares where he screams for Mama and she don't come. And her voice cracked. "I can't go back. I can't. I'd rather die." "Nobody's sending you back. You can't stop him if he comes with the law." He don't have the law. The law is on our side now. The sheriff knows. The judge knows. Raymond jumped bail, which means he's already in the wrong. If he sets foot on this property, I got every right to put him down. Lily stared at him. You'd do that? For us? Lily, I'd do a lot more than that. I'd do things I ain't proud of, but I'd do 'em without hesitating. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she leaned her head against his shoulder, just barely, like she was testing to see if he'd pull away. He didn't. They sat like that in the dark, watching the stars come out one by one, while the dog slept on the porch and the children dreamed inside. The next morning came hot and still, no breeze. The kind of heat that settles on your skin like a blanket and doesn't lift. Ethan was in the barn, forking fresh hay into the stalls, when he heard the dog start barking. Not the alarm bark, a different one. Low and continuous. The kind of bark a dog makes when he's trying to warn you about something that's already too close. Ethan set down the pitchfork and walked to the barn door. The road was empty. The yard was empty. The dog was standing at the gate, hackles up, facing the tree line along the river. Ethan followed his gaze. Nothing moved, but the dog kept barking. What is it, boy? The dog didn't look at him. He just kept staring at the trees, a low growl building in his chest. Ethan walked to the gate. He stood there for a full minute, scanning the cottonwoods, the scrub brush, the bend in the river where the water ran shallow over the rocks. Nothing, but the hair on the back of his neck stood up the way it did before a lightning strike. He went back inside and pulled the Winchester down from the wall. Lily. She came from the kitchen, dish towel in hand. What is it? Keep the children inside. Lock the doors. Don't open them for nobody but me or the sheriff. What did you see? I didn't see nothing. That's what worries me. She didn't argue. She just nodded, went to the front door, and threw the bolt. Then she checked the back door. Then she pulled Emma and Noah into the parlor and sat them down on the floor away from the windows. We're playing a game, she said. It's called the quiet game. Whoever can be the quietest the longest wins. What do we win? Noah asked. A extra biscuit at supper. I'm going to be real quiet. He pressed his finger to his lips. Emma did the same. Lily stood by the parlor window with her back to the wall, watching the slice of yard she could see through the curtains. Ethan took up a position on the porch, the Winchester cradled in his arms, his back to the house. He stood there for an hour. The sun climbed higher. The heat pressed down. The dog eventually stopped barking and lay down in the shade of the porch, but his ears stayed up, swiveling at every sound. Nothing came. By noon, Ethan allowed himself to breathe. He called through the door that it was safe, and he went inside to fix lunch. Lily didn't relax. She stayed by the window while she ate, her sandwich untouched in her hand. You need to eat. I ain't hungry. You need to keep your strength up. I said I ain't hungry. He didn't push. That afternoon he took the wagon into town. He needed supplies, yes, but more than that, he needed to talk to the sheriff face to face. He left Lily with the rifle and a strict instruction. If anyone came up the road besides him, she was to take the children to the root cellar and not come out until she heard his voice or the preacher's wife's. Lily had nodded, her face pale but steady. He drove the wagon faster than he should have, the wheels rattling over the dry ruts. The town was sleepy in the afternoon heat, a few horses tied outside the saloon, a dog sleeping in the middle of the road. The sheriff's office was at the end of Main Street, a squat building of sun-bleached boards with a tin roof. Ethan tied the wagon and went inside. The sheriff was at his desk, a bottle of ink open in front of him, a letter half written. He looked up when Ethan came in and set down his pen without a word. Walker. Sheriff? I was wondering when you'd show up. Mrs. McAllister told me Raymond posted bail. She's got a big mouth. She's got a good heart. The sheriff leaned back in his chair. It creaked under his weight. He posted bail yesterday. I tried to fight it, but the judge set the amount before I could say a word. $200. Somebody paid it within the hour. Who? I don't know. The clerk said it was a woman, but she wore a veil and didn't give a name. Paid in cash. That don't make sense. Raymond don't have $200. He don't have 20. He's got somebody helping him. And that somebody is probably the same somebody who was waiting for him outside the jailhouse when he walked out. Ethan felt the cold settle in his gut. He's coming. I reckon he is. I've got a deputy watching the road leading to your place, but he can't be everywhere. If Raymond is smart, he'll come at night. Raymond ain't smart. No, he ain't. But the somebody helping him might be. The sheriff stood up. He walked to the gun rack and took down a double-barreled shotgun, broke it open, checked the loads. Take this. I got a Winchester. Take it anyway. Keep it loaded. And Walker? Yeah. Don't hesitate. You hesitate, and he'll use that second to do something you can't undo. You understand me? I understand. Ethan took the shotgun. It was heavier than his rifle, solid, reassuring. He tucked it under his arm and walked out into the afternoon sun. The ride home felt longer than the ride in. He kept scanning the tree line, the crests of the hills, the bends in the road. Nothing moved. The only sounds were the creak of the wagon and the buzz of flies. He pulled up at the gate just before sundown. The house was quiet. Too quiet. He jumped down from the wagon before it had fully stopped, the shotgun in his hands. "Lily!" The door opened. Lily stood there, pale but steady. "We're all right. Nobody came." He let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Good, good. He carried the supplies inside, set the shotgun next to the Winchester, and bolted the door behind him. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat in the rocking chair by the fire with the shotgun across his knees, watching the windows, listening to the night sounds. The children slept in the parlor, all three of them together on a pallet of quilts, Emma's arm thrown over Noah, Lily on the outside, her back to the wall. The dog lay across the threshold of the front door, his nose pointed toward the crack beneath it. The hours crawled past. The moon rose, fat and white, casting long shadows across the yard. The crickets thrummed. An owl called from the barn roof. And then, just past 2 in the morning, the dog lifted his head. A low growl started in his chest. Ethan was on his feet before the growl had fully formed. He crossed to the front window in 3 silent steps and parted the curtain a fraction of an inch. The yard was silver under the moon. Empty. But the dog kept growling, his eyes fixed on the tree line near the river. And then Ethan saw it. A flicker of movement. Just a shadow, darker than the other shadows, slipping from one cottonwood to another. Then another. 2 of them. Maybe 3. He couldn't tell. They were staying in the dark, moving slow, circling toward the barn. Lily. His voice was low, but it cut through the quiet like a blade. She was awake instantly, sitting up, her eyes finding his in the dark. What is it? Somebody's out there. Take the children to the root cellar, now. Don't come out till I call. Ethan. Go. She didn't argue. She shook Emma awake, then Noah, who started to whimper. Hush, baby, she whispered. Hush. We're playing the quiet game again, remember? The quietest one wins. She led them to the kitchen, lifted the trapdoor in the floor that led to the root cellar, and helped them down one by one. She paused at the top of the ladder, looking back at Ethan. Don't you die, she said. I ain't planning on it. She pulled the trapdoor closed over her head. Ethan turned back to the window. The shadows had moved closer. They were at the barn now, flattening themselves against the wall. He counted 3, maybe 4. One of them was bigger than the others, broad-shouldered, moving with the heavy tread of a man who had drunk himself past caring. Raymond. Ethan lifted the shotgun. He worked the action, the sound loud in the quiet room. Then he unlocked the front door, pulled it open, and stepped out onto the porch. I know you're there, Burke. The shadows froze. The moon was bright enough to show the shape of them, caught in the act. You come onto my property one step closer, and I will drop you where you stand. I got a shotgun, and I got a clear shot, and I will not hesitate. The big shadow straightened. A voice came out of the dark, slurred with whiskey and rage. You got my children, Walker. Hand 'em over, and I'll let you live. They ain't your children. They ain't ever been your children. They were Sarah's children, and you failed 'em. Now get off my land. Can't do that. Then you better be ready to die in this yard. Ethan leveled the shotgun at the big shadow. His finger found the trigger. The night went silent. Even the crickets stopped. And in that silence, a match flared in the dark, somewhere behind Raymond, near the corner of the barn. A small flame, a lantern being lit. And then another, and another. A line of lanterns, stringing out along the fence line. Someone had set them up in the darkness, and now the wicks caught, one by one, flooding the yard with yellow light. In that light, Ethan saw the men. Raymond, his face twisted and red. Two others behind him, hard-looking men with pistols on their hips. And at the back of the group, standing by the fence with a satisfied smile, a man in a city coat and spectacles, Mr. Henderson. The same man who had come to buy Lily. The match went out. The lanterns burned. And Henderson's voice came soft and cold across the yard. "Evening, Mr. Walker. Surprised to see me?" The weight of the shotgun in Ethan's hands was the only thing keeping him anchored to the ground. The lanterns Henderson had strung along the fence line cast long shadows across the yard, turning every blade of grass into a small black knife. The men stood revealed now, Raymond at the front, his face a mask of drunken rage, two hired pistols flanking him, and Henderson at the back in his city coat and spectacles, looking like a merchant at an auction. "Surprised to see me?" Henderson repeated, his voice carrying across the yard like oil on water. Ethan didn't lower the shotgun. "I figured you'd have the sense to stay gone after the sheriff ran you off. The sheriff is a small-town man with a small-town badge. He don't have jurisdiction over a legal contract." Henderson reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper, holding it up so the lantern light caught the seal. "I have here a signed agreement between Mr. Raymond Burke and myself, dated 3 weeks before he lost custody. In it, he agrees to the transfer of his stepdaughter, Lily Burke, into my household, in exchange for the sum of $50 and forgiveness of a prior debt. Signed and witnessed." Ethan's blood turned to ice. "That ain't worth the paper it's printed on. You can't sell a child like a horse. In Texas you can, if the guardian agrees and the child is of marrying age. Lily is nearly 14. That's legal by state statute." Henderson folded the paper and tucked it back into his coat. "I'm not here to fight you, Mr. Walker. I'm here to collect what's mine. You hand over the girl, and I'll be on my way. You can keep the other two. I've no use for them." Behind Ethan, the trapdoor in the kitchen floor shifted an inch. He couldn't see it, but he could feel it. Lily listening, her breath held, her hand on the ladder. The dog growled low and continuous, his hackles raised like a porcupine. "You're not taking that girl anywhere," Ethan said. His voice was flat and hard as a stone. "Not tonight. Not ever." Raymond lurched forward a step. "She's my stepdaughter. I got rights. You gave up your rights when you put your hands on her. You gave up your rights when you tried to sell her. You gave up your rights when you drove 3 children into a stranger's barn in a thunderstorm." Ethan's finger rested on the trigger guard. "Turn around, Burke. Take your hired men and your city lawyer and get off my land before I decide the price of lead is cheaper than the cost of talking." Henderson sighed, long and theatrical. "I was hoping we could do this the easy way." "Gentlemen?" The 2 hired men drew their pistols. The sound of metal sliding against leather was loud in the still night. Ethan didn't flinch. He had the shotgun leveled at Raymond's chest, and he knew that even if they got a shot off, he'd take Raymond with him. The question was whether he was willing to die for this. The answer came before he finished asking it. Yes. Without hesitation. He'd die for those children. "You fire that thing," Ethan said, "and you'll have to explain to the sheriff why there's a dead man in my yard. And I got witnesses." He tilted his head toward the dark windows of the McAllister place, visible a quarter-mile down the road. "They hear gunshots. They'll be here in 10 minutes. Henderson smiled. 10 minutes is a long time, Mr. Walker. I could do a lot of damage in 10 minutes. "You could, but you'd have to get past me first." The standoff stretched like a wire pulled too tight. The lanterns flickered. A horse stamped somewhere in the dark. Ethan's arms were starting to ache from holding the shotgun steady, but he didn't lower it. He couldn't. Behind him, in the root cellar, 3 children were holding their breath, and he was the only thing standing between them and the darkness. Then a new sound cut through the tension. Footsteps, quick and light, coming from the house. Ethan's heart stopped. He didn't dare turn around. "Lily, get back inside." But the footsteps kept coming. He heard the creak of the porch boards, then the soft thud of bare feet on the hard-packed dirt of the yard. And then Lily Burke, 13 years old, wearing Annabelle's old shirt and a pair of trousers she'd found in the barn, walked past him and stood between him and the men. She was holding the screwdriver, the same rusted screwdriver from the barn. She held it low at her side, point down, like she was ready to drive it into the earth or into a man's throat. "Lily," Ethan said, his voice cracking, "get back inside." "I ain't hiding no more," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. "I've been hiding for 9 months. I've been hiding under beds and in barns and behind fences. I've been hiding so long I forgot what it felt like to stand up straight. I ain't doing it no more." She looked at Raymond. Her stepfather's face was a mess of conflicting emotions: anger, shame, something that might have been regret but was too buried under drink to surface. "Hello, Raymond," she said. "You look like hell." "Lily, sweetheart, you come on over here now. I'll take you home." He held out his hand, the gesture almost tender. "I've been worried sick about you. Don't you dare stand there and pretend you care about me. You sold me. You sold me for $50, and you would have sold Noah for 30. You sold us like we was cattle, and you didn't even blink." Her voice stayed steady, but her hand was shaking around the screwdriver. "I ain't your sweetheart. I ain't your stepdaughter. I ain't nothing to you but a debt you thought you could collect on." "Lily, you listen to me, Raymond Burke. You listen good. You came here tonight to take me away, but you're going to leave with nothing, because I'm not going with you. I'm staying here, with him." She pointed the screwdriver at Ethan. "And if you try to take me, you're going to have to kill me first. And I don't think you got the guts for that." Raymond's face twisted. His hand went to his belt where a pistol was tucked. "You got no idea what I got the guts for. Try it." Lily's voice was ice. "I've been dead for 9 months anyway. What's one more bullet?" The silence that followed was thicker than the Texas heat. Even the crickets had stopped. Ethan could hear his own heartbeat, loud and slow, like a drumbeat counting down to something inevitable. Henderson cleared his throat. "Mr. Burke, I paid you good money. I expect delivery." "Shut up," Raymond snapped. His eyes were fixed on Lily. "You think this man is going to save you? He's a broken-down rancher with a dead wife and an empty house. He don't want you. He just wants somebody to fill the silence. He wants me more than you ever did." Raymond's hand closed around the grip of his pistol. Ethan saw it happen in slow motion, the fingers curling, the knuckles whitening, the barrel beginning to rise. He swung the shotgun toward Raymond's chest, but Lily was in the way. He couldn't fire without hitting her. "Lily, move." "No." "Lily, move now." "No." She took a step forward, closer to Raymond. "You gonna shoot me, Raymond? Go on, do it. My mama's waiting for me on the other side. She'll be glad to see me." "She always said she'd be waiting." Raymond's hand froze. His face went through a dozen changes in the space of a breath. Rage, confusion, and finally something that looked almost like grief. His fingers loosened on the pistol. He let his hand fall to his side. "Get out of here," Lily said. "Get out of here and don't come back. And if you do, I'll be waiting. And I won't be holding a screwdriver." Raymond stared at her for a long moment. Then, without a word, he turned and walked back toward the tree line. The hired men looked at each other, then at Henderson, who was standing frozen with his mouth open. They holstered their pistols and followed. Henderson was the last to move. He looked at Lily with something like admiration or calculation. "You're a remarkable young woman, Miss Burke. I hope we meet again under more pleasant circumstances. You set foot within a mile of this ranch, and I'll put a bullet in you myself," Ethan said. "Now get off my land." Henderson tipped his hat, slow and deliberate, and walked into the darkness after the others. The lanterns he had strung along the fence guttered and died, one by one, as if the night itself was swallowing them. And then there was only the moon and the stars and the sound of the dog whining at the gate. Ethan lowered the shotgun. He stood there for a long moment, trembling, the adrenaline draining out of him in waves. Then he turned to Lily. She was still standing in the yard, the screwdriver at her side, her face pale and wet with tears she hadn't let fall. "You should have stayed inside," he said, but his voice had no bite. "I couldn't let you do it alone. You could have been killed. So could you." She looked up at him, and in the moonlight her eyes were ancient. "But you were willing to die for us. That's more than anybody ever done for me before." He didn't know what to say to that. So he did the only thing that made sense. He opened his arms, and she walked into them, dropping the screwdriver in the dirt. She buried her face in his shirt and cried. Not the quiet crying of a child who'd learned to hide her tears, but the deep, racking sobs of a girl who had carried a mountain and finally set it down. Inside the house, the trapdoor creaked open. Emma's head appeared, her eyes wide. "Is it over?" she whispered. "Is the bad man gone?" "It's over, sugar," Ethan called out, his voice rough. "Come on out, it's safe." Emma scrambled up the ladder and ran to them, wrapping her arms around Lily's waist. Noah came next, slower, rubbing his eyes. He walked up to Ethan and held up his arms. Ethan shifted Lily to one side and lifted the boy onto his hip. "Pa?" Noah said, his voice small. "Yeah, son." "Are we going to have to leave?" Ethan looked down at the three of them. Lily's face pressed against his chest, Emma's arms tight around her sister, Noah's head resting on his shoulder. He looked out at the empty yard, at the last dying glow of Henderson's lanterns, at the stars wheeling overhead. "No, son, this is your home, for as long as you want it." Noah nodded and closed his eyes. He was asleep before Ethan carried him through the door. The rest of the night passed in a blur of small rituals. Ethan lit every lamp in the house, pushing back the darkness. He made hot milk for the children, even though none of them were hungry. He sat in the rocking chair with Noah in his lap and the dog at his feet, while Lily and Emma curled up together on the rag rug. Nobody slept. Nobody talked much. But the silence was different now. It wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of survivors catching their breath. Dawn came slow, the sky turning from black to gray to pale gold. The sun rose over the east pasture like a promise kept. Ethan carried Noah up to his bed, then Emma, then stood in the doorway of the room Lily now shared with her sister, and watched her sleep. She had her hand under her pillow, where she'd hidden the screwdriver before she finally closed her eyes. He walked downstairs and stood on the front porch. The yard was empty. The lanterns were cold. But at the gate, there was a single footprint in the dust, a man's boot, large, heading away from the house. It was the last trace of Raymond Burke on his land. He heard the wagon before he saw it, coming up the road at a brisk pace, the wheels kicking up dust. Ethan went inside and retrieved the Winchester, then stepped back onto the porch. But the wagon was driven by a woman in a black dress, and beside her sat the sheriff, and in the back were three men he recognized from town, the McAllister brothers, both carrying rifles. The sheriff climbed down before the wagon had fully stopped. "Walker." "We heard shots." "There weren't any shots." "We heard something. Neighbor said there was a commotion out your way around 2 in the morning." Ethan leaned the Winchester against the porch rail. There was a commotion. Raymond Burke showed up with Henderson and 2 hired guns. They had a paper, said it was a contract for Lily. The sheriff's face went dark. "Where are they now?" "Gone. I ran 'em off. Lily stared 'em down herself." The sheriff stared at him. "The girl?" "She walked out into the yard with a screwdriver and told Raymond to his face that she'd rather die than go with him." He backed down. The sheriff took off his hat and ran a hand through his hair. "That's the bravest thing I ever heard." "You want to know something, Sheriff? I think it's the bravest thing I ever saw, too." The sheriff nodded slowly. He turned to the wagon and waved off the McAllister brothers, who relaxed their rifles and settled back onto their bench. "I'm going to ride out to the county seat today. I'm going to talk to the judge about getting that contract voided. And I'm going to make sure Raymond Burke don't see the outside of a cell for a long, long time." "I'd appreciate that." The sheriff climbed back onto the wagon. "Walker." "Yeah. Keep that girl close. She's going to do something special with her life." "I know it." The wagon turned and headed back down the road. Ethan stood on the porch and watched it go, the dust settling behind it like a curtain closing on a long, dark act. The sun was fully up now, warm on his face. Behind him, inside the house, he heard Lily stirring. He heard Emma's sleepy voice asking for breakfast. He heard Noah's footsteps padding across the floor. He turned and went inside to start the day. The morning passed in a haze of small motions. Ethan fried bacon and eggs, sliced bread, poured milk. The children ate slowly, mechanically, but they ate. Lily kept looking at the door, but every time she looked, the door stayed closed. By noon, she had stopped checking. It was Emma who broke the silence. She set down her fork and looked at Ethan with her big, serious eyes. "Mr. Ethan?" "Yes, sugar." "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Are we going to stay here forever?" Ethan set down his coffee cup. He looked at Emma, then at Lily, then at Noah, who had stopped eating to listen. "That depends on what you want. If you want to stay, I'll keep you as long as I'm breathing. If you want to leave someday, that's your choice too. But you don't have to decide today. You don't have to decide this year. This is your home for as long as you need it." Emma nodded. She picked up her fork and went back to her eggs, and that was that. That afternoon, Ethan took the children to the creek. It was the first time he'd let them out of his sight of the house since they'd arrived. But the day was too bright and too still to stay cooped up, and he figured Raymond was far enough away by now to give them a few hours of peace. Noah splashed in the shallows, chasing minnows with his hands. Emma sat on the bank drawing flowers in the mud with a stick. Lily sat on a flat rock with her feet in the water, watching the current slide past. Ethan sat on the grass a few feet away, keeping one eye on the children and one eye on the tree line. "She's pretty," Lily said, not looking at him. "Who?" "The creek. When I was little, my mama used to take me to a creek just like this, before she married Raymond. Before everything got hard, we'd sit on the bank and she'd tell me stories about the fish and the birds, and the way the water always knew where to go." "What kind of stories?" "Stories about a girl who could talk to the river. The river would tell her secrets, and she'd pass them on to the people who needed to hear them." Lily smiled, a small, fragile thing. "I used to think I was that girl." "You still could be." She looked at him. "What do you mean?" "The river still talks. You just got to be quiet enough to hear it." She stared at him for a long moment. Then she looked back at the creek, and she was quiet. The water slid past, murmuring over the stones. A kingfisher dove from an overhanging branch and came up with a silver minnow. Across the field, a cow lowed to her calf. For a long time, nobody spoke. And in that silence, something settled into place. Not fixed, not healed, but beginning to knit. The way bone knits after a break. The way land knits after a fire. Slow, painful, inevitable. They stayed until the sun began to slant long and golden through the cottonwoods. Then Ethan gathered them up and walked them home, their shadows stretching out behind them like the long shadows of a family that had finally found its ground. The days after the creek began to blend into one another, each one a little lighter than the last. The summer heat pressed down on the ranch like a hand on the back of the neck, but the children found their rhythms. Noah woke at dawn every morning and followed Ethan to the barn, chattering about Buttercup and the chickens and the hawk he'd seen circling the south pasture. Emma spent hours at her easel, painting sunflowers and horses, and a portrait of a woman with kind eyes that she said was Annabelle, though she'd never seen a picture. Lily helped with the chores without being asked, washing dishes, sweeping the porch, mending a tear in Noah's shirt with stitches that were too small and too careful to have been learned in the past few weeks. Ethan watched her the way a man watches a slowly healing wound. She was stronger than she knew, but she carried her pain like a bruise that hadn't yet faded from purple to yellow. She flinched at loud noises. She checked the windows before she sat down to eat. She never let the screwdriver out of reach, though she kept it hidden now, tucked into the waistband of her skirt whenever she was outside. But she was sleeping. Not through the night, not yet, but longer stretches, 3 hours, 4, once, 5, until a dream pulled her back to the surface. She would come down to breakfast with shadows under her eyes, but she would eat. She would answer when spoken to. She would even smile, sometimes, a small, tentative smile that reminded Ethan of a fawn taking its first steps. The sheriff came by twice a week. He never stayed long, and he never came empty-handed. The first time, he brought a bag of flour and a slab of salt pork. The second time, a stack of schoolbooks that had been gathering dust in his office. The third time, a letter. It was addressed to Mr. Ethan Walker, in a careful, educated hand. Ethan opened it on the porch while Lily watched from the kitchen window. It was from the judge. The hearing for permanent guardianship had been scheduled for the second week of October. The court had received a counter-petition from Mr. Henderson, claiming that the contract with Raymond Burke was legally binding and that he had been denied his lawful property. The judge wanted to hear testimony from all parties before making a final ruling. Ethan read the letter twice. Then he folded it and put it in his pocket. "What is it?" Lily asked when he came inside. "Nothing you need to worry about. Just court stuff." "Court stuff about us?" "About the guardianship. It's just a hearing. They gotta make it official." She studied his face. "You're lying." "I ain't lying. You're not telling me everything." He set the coffee pot down and sat across from her at the table. "Henderson filed a petition. He's trying to claim that contract is valid. The judge wants to hear both sides before he makes a decision." Lily's face went pale, but she didn't look away. "Can he win?" "No. You don't know that. I know that a piece of paper can't be used to sell a child. I know that Raymond confessed to the sheriff. I know that Henderson has a reputation a mile long and that the judge ain't blind. He can't win, Lily, but he can make things difficult." "Difficult how?" "He can drag it out. He can demand witnesses. He can make you stand up in court and tell the whole county what happened." Ethan reached across the table and took her hand. "And you can do that. You can stand up and tell them. And when you do, they'll see what I see. A girl who survived something that would have broken most grown men." Lily's chin trembled. "I don't want to go to court." "I know. I don't want to see him again. Or Henderson. I don't want to stand in a room full of strangers and talk about Mama and the bruises and the night I left." "Then I'll do the talking. I'll tell them everything you told me. And if they need to hear it from you, I'll be right there beside you the whole time." She pulled her hand away and stood up. She walked to the window and stood looking out at the yard where Emma was chasing a chicken and Noah was trying to teach the dog to sit. "What if they take us away?" "They won't. They took us away from Mama. The fever took her, and then Raymond took everything else. What if the court takes us away from you?" Ethan stood up and walked to the window. He stood beside her, not touching, but close enough that she could feel his warmth. "Lily, look at me." She turned. Her eyes were wet, but she met his gaze. "I have lost everything I ever loved," he said. "I lost my wife. I lost my daughter before she drew her first breath. I lost a piece of myself that I thought I'd never get back. And then you three showed up in my barn, scared and starving and brave as all get out. And I found something I didn't know I was looking for. I found a reason to get up in the morning that ain't just chores and cattle." He paused. His voice was rough. "I am not going to lose you, not to a piece of paper, not to a man in a city coat, not to the law. You are my family now, and I will fight for you with every breath I've got left." Lily stood very still. Then she reached out and took his hand. It was the first time she had reached for him without being asked. "Promise me," she said. "I promise." The days between the letter and the hearing passed like a slow tide. Ethan worked the ranch from dawn to dusk, but he always kept the children within sight. Noah helped with the chores, his small hands learning the feel of a hammer and the weight of a feed bucket. Emma painted a mural on the side of the barn, a sprawling field of sunflowers with a blue sky and a red barn in the distance. It was crooked and bright and the most beautiful thing Ethan had ever seen. Lily spent time with Mrs. McAllister, who came by twice a week with books and sewing and the kind of steady presence that didn't demand conversation. Mrs. McAllister taught her how to embroider, how to hem a dress, how to write a proper letter. And in return, Lily taught her the names of the constellations, which she had learned from her mother on long nights when they had no lantern oil. One evening, about a week before the hearing, the preacher's wife came to call. She was a small woman with iron-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She sat in Ethan's kitchen and drank his coffee and looked at Lily with a gaze that was both gentle and searching. "Miss Burke," she said, "I understand you've been through a trial that would have broken many." "Yes, ma'am." "I also understand you're going to have to stand up in court and tell your story." "Yes, ma'am." "It takes a special kind of courage to speak the truth when the truth is ugly. Do you have that courage?" Lily met her eyes. "I didn't think I did, but I found it, somewhere." The preacher's wife nodded slowly. "I thought so. I've been praying for you, Miss Burke, and I've been asking the Lord to give you the words to speak when the time comes." "Thank you, ma'am. There's something else. The preacher's wife reached into her bag and pulled out a small leather-bound book. This was my mother's Bible. She carried it through the war, through the loss of 2 children, through the death of my father. It's been with me through every trial of my own. I want you to have it. Lily stared at the book. I can't take that. You can, and you will. Open it. Lily opened the Bible. On the first page, in faded ink, was written, "To my daughter, on the day of her trial, be not afraid, for I am with you." The preacher's wife stood up. "You're not alone, Miss Burke. You haven't been alone for a long time." She touched Lily's shoulder, then turned to Ethan. "Mr. Walker, you've got a good girl there. Take care of her." "Yes, ma'am." She left. Lily sat at the table, holding the Bible in both hands, not opening it again, just holding it. After a long moment, she carried it upstairs and placed it on the shelf beside her bed, next to the folded paper from the judge and the letter from Ruby Calloway in Galveston. The night before the hearing, Ethan couldn't sleep. He sat on the porch with the dog at his feet, watching the stars wheel overhead. The door opened behind him, and Lily came out. She was wearing the dress Mrs. McAllister had brought, a simple blue calico with white buttons and a hem that had been let down twice. Her hair was braided clean. She looked older than 13. She looked like she had been carrying the weight of the world for 1,000 years. "Can't sleep?" Ethan asked. "No." "Me neither." She sat down on the step beside him. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The night was still and warm, the kind of night that made you forget there was anything wrong in the world. "Ethan?" "Yeah." "What if I get up there and I can't talk? What if I open my mouth and nothing comes out?" "Then I'll talk for you. I'll tell them everything. I'll tell them about the barn and the screwdriver and the way you took care of your brother and sister when you was the one who needed taking care of. I'll tell them about the 9 days you walked across 3 counties with nothing but a flour sack and a kitchen knife. And if they still don't believe you, I'll take you home and we'll figure something else out." "What else is there to figure out?" "I don't know, but we'll figure it together." She was quiet for a moment. Then she leaned her head against his shoulder. "You really ain't gonna let them take us?" "No, Lily, I ain't." She didn't say anything else. She just sat there, her head on his shoulder, her hands folded in her lap, watching the stars. The dog sighed and put his head on her knee. And somewhere in the dark, an owl called, and another answered, and the night wrapped around them like a blanket. The hearing was held in the county courthouse, a brick building with tall windows and a clock tower that had been stopped at 11:04 for as long as anyone could remember. The courtroom was full. Mrs. McAllister sat in the front row with the preacher's wife. Old Henrietta Boggs had driven in from her place, her cane propped against the bench. The McAllister brothers stood at the back, their hats in their hands. Even the school teacher had closed the school for the morning and brought her students to sit in the gallery. Not to watch, she said, but to learn what courage looked like. Ethan sat at the front with Lily on one side and Emma and Noah on the other. The children were dressed in their best, Emma in a dress that Mrs. McAllister had hemmed, Noah in a shirt that had been washed and ironed so many times the fabric was soft as butter. Lily wore the blue calico. She had the preacher's wife's Bible in her lap and her hands resting on it, steady as stone. The judge entered. The court rose. The bailiff called the case. Petition for permanent guardianship of Lily Burke, Emma Burke, and Noah Burke, filed by Mr. Ethan Walker. Counterpetition filed by Mr. Alistair Henderson. Mr. Hadley, the young lawyer with the soft voice, stood up and presented Ethan's case. He called the sheriff to the stand. The sheriff testified about the condition of the children when they were found, the bruises on Emma's face, the nightmares that had been reported by Mrs. McAllister, the confession Raymond Burke had made while in custody. He produced the contract that Henderson had waived in the yard, and he explained why it was invalid. No judge had approved it, no witness had signed it, and the child in question had not consented. Then Mr. Hadley called Lily to the stand. She walked up to the witness box with her head high and her hands steady. She was sworn in. She sat down, and for the next 40 minutes she told her story. She told it without crying, without wavering. She told it the way a person tells a story that has been rehearsed in the dark too many times to be forgotten. She spoke about her mother's illness and death. She spoke about the abuse that started slowly and grew worse. She spoke about the night Raymond brought home the traveler and the plan to sell Noah. She spoke about the wedding ring she had taken from her mother's dresser, the $20 from Raymond's coat, the 9 days of walking, the barn, the screwdriver, the man who had opened his door to 3 strangers in a storm. When she finished, the courtroom was silent. The judge had stopped taking notes. He was just watching her, his pen frozen above the page. Mr. Henderson's lawyer stood up. He was a man from Fort Worth, sharp in a tailored suit, with a voice like oiled steel. He tried to break Lily's testimony. "Miss Burke, isn't it true that your mother married Mr. Burke of her own free will?" "Yes." "And isn't it true that Mr. Burke provided for you and your siblings after your mother's death?" "He provided a roof. He didn't provide safety." "Miss Burke, isn't it possible that you're exaggerating the events of the past year? Perhaps you misunderstood your stepfather's intentions." Lily looked at him. She looked at him the way a hawk looks at a field mouse. "Sir," she said, "I have a scar on my back from the belt buckle." Emma still can't hear out of one ear. Noah wakes up screaming every night because he dreams about the man who was going to buy him. "You want to see the scar? I'll show you." The lawyer didn't ask to see it. Mr. Hadley stood up again. "Your Honor, I'd like to call Mr. Henderson to the stand." Henderson took the stand with the same smooth confidence he had shown in the yard. He produced the contract. He explained that he had paid Raymond Burke $50 in good faith. He said he had been looking for a wife, not a servant, and that he had been misled about the girl's age. He claimed he had no knowledge of the abuse. The judge listened. He asked a few questions. Then he excused Henderson and called Ethan to the stand. Ethan walked up to the witness box with his hat in his hands. He sat down and answered every question the lawyers asked. Yes, he had found the children in his barn. Yes, they had been starving and scared. Yes, he had taken them in. Yes, he wanted to keep them. No, he had not been paid. No, he did not want compensation. He wanted to be their father. When the questioning was done, the judge leaned back in his chair. He looked at the papers on his desk. He looked at Lily, still sitting in the witness box, her hands folded on the Bible. He looked at Emma and Noah, sitting in the front row, holding hands. "Mr. Walker," he said, "I've been a judge in this county for 23 years. I've seen a lot of cases. Some of them have broken my heart. Some of them have made me ashamed of my own kind. And some of them have reminded me why I took this job in the first place." He paused. "This is one of those cases. I have before me a man who took in 3 children he had no obligation to, who fed them, clothed them, protected them, and loved them. I have before me a girl who survived the worst this world can throw at a child and came out the other side with her spirit intact. And I have before me 2 younger children who have a chance at a real life because of the courage of their sister and the decency of a stranger." He signed the paper. "Petition granted. Full permanent guardianship of Lily Burke, Emma Burke, and Noah Burke is hereby awarded to Mr. Ethan Walker. Mr. Henderson's counterpetition is dismissed with prejudice. Mr. Raymond Burke's parental rights are terminated effective immediately." He banged the gavel. The sound echoed through the silent courtroom. The next thing Ethan knew, Lily was in his arms, and Emma was wrapped around his legs, and Noah was climbing onto his lap. The courtroom was full of people crying. Mrs. McAllister was sobbing into her handkerchief. Old Henrietta Boggs was pounding her cane on the floor. The preacher's wife was saying a prayer out loud, and her voice was shaking with joy. Mr. Hadley walked over and shook Ethan's hand. "Congratulations, Mr. Walker." "Thank you," Ethan managed. His voice was hoarse. "One more thing." Mr. Hadley reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folded paper. "I had a colleague of mine draw this up just in case. It's a petition for a name change, if you want." Ethan looked at the paper. It was a simple form, with blank lines for the old names and the new ones. He looked at Lily. She took the paper from the lawyer. She looked at it, her eyes moving over the words. Then she looked up at Ethan. "Can we?" she asked. "Only if you want to." She thought about it. Then she took the pen the lawyer offered, and she wrote. The courtroom was emptying, but Ethan didn't notice. He was watching Lily's hand move across the page. She wrote slowly. carefully, as if each letter was a stone laid on a path she was building with her own hands. She signed her name. Then she passed the paper to Emma, who signed with a wobbly X, then to Noah, who drew a circle that he insisted was his name. Lily handed the paper back to Ethan. On it, in her careful handwriting, was written, Lily Walker, Emma Walker, Noah Walker. Ethan stared at it for a long time. He didn't realize he was crying until a tear splashed onto the paper, smudging the ink. He folded the paper and put it in his breast pocket, close to his heart. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you, Pa," Lily said, and that was enough. That was everything. The autumn sun hung low and golden over the river road, turning the cottonwood leaves into coins of light that shivered in the breeze. 3 weeks had passed since the courthouse, and the name change had been made official by a judge in Fort Worth who had signed the papers without a second glance. The new names were registered in the county ledger, and somewhere in the dusty archives of the state, Lily Burke had become Lily Walker, along with her brother and sister. It was a small thing, a few strokes of ink on a page, but it felt like the difference between being lost and being found. Ethan had hung the framed certificate on the wall beside the kitchen door, next to the faded photograph of Annabelle he had taken down from the bedroom and brought into the everyday light. He had caught Lily staring at the photograph more than once, studying the face of the woman she had never met, as if she were trying to memorize the curve of her jaw and the set of her smile. She never said anything about it, but she had started tucking a wildflower into the corner of the frame every morning. A fresh one, picked from the yard before the dew had dried. The household had settled into a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. Noah woke first, slipping out of his bed and padding down the stairs in his bare feet to find the dog already waiting at the bottom. Together they would sit on the porch steps and watch the sun come up, the boy's hand resting on the dog's head, both of them silent and patient. Emma had taken over the kitchen table with her paints, and the house was slowly being colonized by sunflowers. On the walls, on the windowsills, on the scraps of wood she had found in the barn, and turned into small paintings that she gave away to anyone who visited. Lily had taken to rising early as well, but she didn't sit on the porch. She moved through the house with a quiet purpose, lighting the fire, putting the coffee on, slicing bread for toast. She did these things without being asked, without being thanked, and when Ethan tried to tell her she didn't need to, she just shook her head and kept working. It was how she showed she belonged, not with words, but with the small, steady motions of a person building a home. School had started the second week of September. Mrs. McAllister had come by the week before, carrying a slate and a box of chalk and a stack of primers that had belonged to her own children. She had sat down with Lily and Emma at the kitchen table and walked them through the lessons they had missed, her voice patient and unhurried. Lily had picked up her studies like a soldier picking up a weapon, quickly, efficiently, without complaint. Emma had struggled with the reading, her eyes crossing over the letters, but Mrs. McAllister had simply slowed down and started again, and Emma had eventually found her footing. Noah was too young for school, but he had appointed himself Ethan's assistant, and he followed the rancher from chore to chore with the dog at his heels. He had learned to carry a bucket without spilling, to hold a nail steady while Ethan hammered, to call the chickens in for feed with a sound that was somewhere between a whistle and a squawk. He had stopped flinching when Ethan raised his voice to call the cattle. He had stopped checking the windows before he sat down to eat. He was becoming a boy again, slowly, the way grass grows over a wound in the earth. The school was a half-mile walk down the river road, a whitewashed building with a bell tower that rang at 8 in the morning and 3 in the afternoon. Lily walked Emma to the door every morning, waited until she was inside, and then walked to her own classroom on the other side of the building, where the older students sat on benches that had been worn smooth by generations of children. The first week had been hard. There were whispers, of course. There were always whispers. Children who had heard their parents talk about the trial, about the girl who had been sold, about the rancher who had taken her in. They stared, they pointed. A boy named Samuel Higgins had called her a name that made the blood drain from her face, but she had not flinched. She had looked at Samuel Higgins until he looked away. She had taken her seat at the back of the classroom. and she had opened her book, and she had read. And the whispers had faded, not all at once, but gradually, the way dust settles after a passing wagon. By the third week, a girl named Susanna Porter had asked to share her lunch. By the fourth week, Lily had been invited to a birthday party. She had not gone. She had made an excuse about chores, but she had thanked Susanna with a smile that was not quite comfortable on her face. And Susanna had smiled back. It was a beginning. At home, the evenings had taken on a shape that was becoming precious to Ethan. After supper, when the dishes were washed and the lamps were lit, the four of them would gather in the parlor. Noah would climb into Ethan's lap without asking, his small body folding into the familiar hollow of the rocking chair. Emma would lie on the rug with her chin propped on her hands, drawing or reading or just staring at the fire. And Lily would sit on the floor with her back against the sofa, the preacher's wife's Bible open in her hands, reading aloud in a voice that was soft and steady. She had started with the Psalms because she said they sounded like poetry. Then she had moved to the story of Ruth, because Ruth had left everything she knew to stay with the people she loved. She read slowly, stumbling over the harder words, but she never gave up. And when she finished a chapter, she would close the book and look at Ethan, and he would nod, and she would know that she had done something good. One night, after Emma and Noah had fallen asleep and Lily had gone up to her room, Ethan sat alone in the rocking chair and thought about the shape of his life. 9 years ago, he had buried his wife and his daughter in the same week, and he had thought that the rest of his days would be a long, gray stretch of solitude. He had not minded it exactly, he had made his peace with it. But he had not known what he was missing until 3 children had crawled out of the dark of his barn and into the light of his kitchen. He heard a creak on the stairs. Lily appeared in the doorway, her hair loose around her shoulders, a candle in her hand. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "I keep thinking about tomorrow." "What's tomorrow?" "The spelling bee. Mrs. McAllister entered me in it." "I didn't ask to be." "That sounds like something she'd do." Lily walked over and sat on the arm of the rocking chair, the candle casting long shadows across the room. "What if I forget everything? What if I get up there and my mind goes blank?" "Then you take a breath, and you remember the first word, and you go from there." "What if I can't remember the first word?" "Then you smile, and you walk off the stage, and you try again next time." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You really think I can do it?" "Lily, I think you can do anything you set your mind to. I've watched you do things that would have broken most grown men. I think you can spell a few words in front of a room full of folks." She smiled. It was a small smile, barely there, but it was real. "Will you come watch?" "I wouldn't miss it for the world." The spelling bee was held in the town hall, a building that smelled of old wood and dust and the faint sweetness of dried flowers. The room was packed. Farmers and their wives, shopkeepers and schoolchildren, old Henrietta Boggs in her usual seat by the window. The McAllister brothers had come straight from the field, their boots still muddy, their hats in their hands. Ethan sat in the second row with Emma on one side and Noah on the other. Emma was clutching a small bouquet of wildflowers she had picked that morning, intended for Lily whether she won or lost. Noah was eating a peppermint stick that Mrs. McAllister had given him, his cheeks puffed out like a chipmunk. Lily stood at the front of the room with 9 other students, ranging in age from 10 to 15. She was wearing the blue calico dress, her hair braided neatly, her hands clasped in front of her. She looked calm. She looked like she belonged there. The first few rounds went quickly. Simple words: cat, dog, house. The younger students fell one by one, walking off the stage with their heads held high or their shoulders slumped, depending on their temperament. By the 5th round, there were only 4 left: Lily, Susanna Porter, a boy named Thomas Green, and a girl named Beatrice Howard, the same Beatrice who had spoken cruelly to Lily on the first day of school. Ethan's jaw tightened. He watched Beatrice's face as she spelled calendar without a mistake. He watched Lily spell courage without hesitation. The word felt chosen, as if the examiner had known exactly what Lily needed to prove. Round 6. Thomas missed February. He walked off the stage with a shrug and a grin, and the crowd clapped. Round 7. Beatrice spelled necessary perfectly. Lily spelled restaurant without missing a beat. Round 8. The words grew harder. Accommodate, vaccinate, conscientious. Both girls spelled them all. The room was tense now, the crowd leaning forward in their seats. Noah had stopped eating his peppermint. Emma was gripping Ethan's sleeve. Round 9. The examiner, a thin man with spectacles and a soft voice, looked at his card and frowned. He looked at the two girls standing before him. Then he said, "The word is guardianship." The room went very still. Beatrice Howard's face went white. She opened her mouth. She closed it. She tried again. Guardianship. She spelled it slowly, carefully. Then she looked at the examiner, her eyes wide. The examiner shook his head. "I'm sorry, Beatrice. That is incorrect." Beatrice's face crumpled. She walked off the stage without looking at anyone, her hands clenched at her sides. Mrs. McAllister rose from her seat and followed her out, a hand on her shoulder. Now only Lily remained. The examiner looked at her. "Lily, would you like to attempt the word?" "Yes, sir." She took a breath. She closed her eyes. And then she spelled it, not fast, but with a certainty that filled the room like a bell ringing. Guardianship. The examiner checked his card. He smiled. "That is correct." The crowd erupted. Emma was on her feet, screaming. Noah was jumping up and down. Ethan was clapping so hard his palms stung. And Lily stood on the stage with her hands trembling at her sides and a look on her face that he had never seen before. It was the look of a person who had been told all her life that she was worthless and had just proven the world wrong. She walked off the stage in a daze. People reached out to touch her shoulder, to congratulate her, but she didn't seem to see them. She walked straight to Ethan and stood in front of him, her eyes bright. "I did it, Pa." "You did it, sweetheart." "I spelled guardianship." "I know, I heard you." She threw her arms around his neck and held on tight. He held her back, feeling her heart beating against his chest, fast and strong. Emma pushed through the crowd and wrapped her arms around both of them, the wilting wildflowers crushed between their bodies. Noah climbed up Ethan's leg and wrapped himself around his waist. The four of them stood there in the middle of the town hall, surrounded by people clapping and cheering. And they were a family. They were a family. That night, after the celebration had died down and the children were asleep, Ethan sat on the porch with a cup of cold coffee and watched the moon rise over the cottonwoods. The spelling bee trophy, a small, tarnished cup on a wooden base, sat on the kitchen table, and he had caught Lily looking at it twice before she went upstairs, touching it with one finger as if she was still making sure it was real. He heard the door open behind him. He didn't turn. "Can't sleep?" Lily asked. "Just thinking." She sat down beside him on the step, close enough that their shoulders touched. She had the trophy in her hands, turning it over and over. "You know what I kept thinking about," she said, "while I was standing up there?" "What?" "I kept thinking about the barn. That first night. I kept thinking about how I had a screwdriver, and you had a shotgun, and I thought you was going to kill me, and then you didn't. You gave us blankets and stew and a fire, and now I have a trophy. The screwdriver is still in your dresser drawer," she smiled. "I know. I keep it to remind myself." "Remind yourself of what?" "That I can be scared and brave at the same time." He looked at her. The moonlight caught her face, making her look older than her years and young at the same time. "You're the bravest person I know, Lily Walker." She didn't answer, but she leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat there together, watching the moon climb higher, while inside the house 2 children slept in warm beds and a fire crackled in the hearth. The next morning, a letter arrived. It was addressed to Miss Lily Walker in a hand that Ethan didn't recognize. A child's hand, careful and unsteady, as if each letter had been drawn rather than written. The postmark was from a town he had never heard of, somewhere north of the Red River. Lily opened it at the breakfast table. She read it once, then again. Then she set it down and stared at it. "Who's it from?" Ethan asked. She looked up and her eyes were wet. "It's from a girl named Ruth. She says she was one of the others, the ones who got out because I spoke in court. She says she's living with her aunt now, and she's safe, and she wanted to say thank you." The kitchen was quiet. Emma had stopped eating. Noah had stopped fidgeting. Lily picked up the letter and read aloud. Her voice was steady, but it cracked on the last sentence. "I don't know your face, Lily, but I know your voice. I heard it in the courtroom when they read your testimony. You said, 'I am not afraid of the truth,' and I thought, if she can say that, then so can I. So I told my aunt what happened, and she believed me, and now I am safe. Thank you for being brave when I could not be. Your sister, Ruth." Lily folded the letter carefully and tucked it into the pocket of her dress next to the folded paper from the judge. She sat there for a long moment, not moving. Then she picked up her fork and went back to her breakfast. And Ethan watched her and thought about how the smallest acts of courage could ripple outward like stones thrown into a still pond, touching lives that you would never meet, never know, never see. He thought about the night in the barn when a girl with a rusted screwdriver had pointed it at his heart, and he had seen the truth in her eyes. He thought about the 9 days she had walked across 3 counties with nothing but a flour sack and a kitchen knife. He thought about the courage it took to stand up in court and speak the ugly truth into a room full of strangers. And he thought that if Lily Walker could do all that before she was 14, then the world had better watch out for what she would do with the rest of her life. The harvest moon rose full and orange over the river road, and the nights grew cool enough to need a fire in the hearth. The cattle were brought down from the high pasture. The barn was stuffed with hay. The root cellar was stocked with preserves and potatoes and the last of the summer squash. Ethan worked from dawn to dusk, his body settling into the familiar ache of autumn preparations. And the children worked beside him, learning the rhythms of the land that would sustain them through the winter. It was on a Tuesday afternoon, when the wind had turned sharp and the first frost glistened on the grass, that a wagon came up the road. It was not the sheriff's wagon or Mrs. McAllister's. It was a wagon Ethan had never seen, pulled by a pair of matched bays, driven by a woman in a black dress with a face that looked familiar in a way that made his stomach drop. The woman pulled up at the gate and climbed down. She was tall, with gray-streaked hair pulled back tight, and eyes that were the same shade of gray as Lily's, the same gray that Sarah Burke had passed to her daughter before she died. "Mr. Walker," she said, "my name is May Holloway. I'm Sarah Burke's sister." Ethan felt the world tilt. He had been dreading this moment and hoping for it at the same time. A face from the children's past, a claim that could undo everything he had built. "I've come for the children," she said. The words hung in the air like a shot fired into still water. Ethan felt the blood drain from his face, then rush back hot. His hand found the porch rail and held it tight. "I beg your pardon, ma'am." May Holloway stood by the gate, her hands clasped in front of her, her gray eyes steady. She did not look like a woman who had come to make trouble. She looked like a woman who had been holding her breath for a long time and had finally let it out. "I've come for the children, Mr. Walker. I'm their aunt, their mother's only sister. I've been trying to get to them since the spring, but Raymond kept me away. He told the sheriff I was a meddler, that I had no claim, and after the trial, I had to wait until the court papers were settled." She took a step forward. "I know you've taken good care of them. I know you've given them a home. But they're my blood. I want to see them." Ethan didn't move. The dog had risen from the porch and was standing at his side, growling low in his chest. "They're my children now, ma'am. The court made it official. I got the papers framed on the wall. I know. I read the ruling. But I'm not here to take them from you." She held up her hands, empty. "I'm here to see them, to meet them, to know that they're all right with my own eyes. And then, if they want to stay with you, I'll go." Ethan studied her face. She looked tired. The kind of tired that comes from years of worry and sleepless nights. Her dress was worn at the cuffs. Her hands were rough with work. She was not a woman of means. She was a woman who had spent everything she had to get here. "Wait here," he said. He went inside. The children were in the parlor, Emma at her easel, Noah on the floor with the dog's head in his lap, Lily at the table reading. They all looked up when he entered. "Lily, there's someone here to see you, your aunt, your mama's sister." Lily went still as stone. The book slipped from her hands and landed on the floor with a soft thud. Emma turned from her easel, paintbrush frozen mid-stroke. Noah looked from Lily to Ethan and back again. "Aunt May?" Lily whispered. "She's at the gate. She says she came to see you. She says she's not here to take you away." Lily stood up slowly. Her hands were shaking. She walked to the window and looked out at the woman standing by the gate, and something in her face softened. "She looks like Mama," she said. "Do you want to see her?" Lily nodded. She crossed the room and opened the door. Ethan followed her out onto the porch. Emma and Noah came behind, clutching each other's hands. May Holloway saw them and stopped breathing. Her hand went to her mouth. Her eyes filled with tears. "Oh," she said. "Oh, sweet Lord, Lily, you look just like her." Lily walked down the steps. She stopped a few feet from her aunt, her hands clasped in front of her, her chin lifted. "Aunt May." "Lily, I've been trying to get to you for so long. I wrote letters. I sent telegrams. Raymond told everyone I was a crazy old woman, that I had no right. But I never stopped trying." Her voice broke. "I never stopped. Why didn't you come sooner?" May's face crumpled. "Because I was afraid. He threatened to kill me if I set foot in the county, and I believed him. I was a coward, Lily. I was a coward, and I'm so sorry." Lily stood very still. The wind lifted a strand of her hair and wrapped it across her face. She didn't brush it away. "Are you here to take us?" she asked. "No." May's voice was firm now. "No, I'm not. I came to see you, to know you're safe, and if you want to stay here with Mr. Walker, I'll go back to Beaumont and I'll write you letters, and I'll visit when I can. But I won't take you away from a home where you're loved." Lily looked at her for a long moment. Then she crossed the last few feet and put her arms around her aunt. May held her like she was made of glass, crying into her hair, whispering words that Ethan couldn't hear. Emma tugged at his sleeve. "Is she going to be our aunt now?" "She already is, sugar. She always was." "But is she going to live with us?" "No. She's going to live in Beaumont, but she's going to visit." Emma considered this. Then she nodded and walked down the steps to join her sister. Noah followed, and soon all three children were wrapped in May Holloway's arms, and May was crying so hard she couldn't speak. Ethan stood on the porch and watched. He felt a strange mix of relief and fear. Relief that May was not an enemy, fear that her presence might unsettle the fragile peace they had built. But the children were smiling through their tears, and May was holding them like she had been waiting her whole life for this moment. He walked down the steps and extended his hand. "Ma'am, why don't you come inside? I got coffee on the stove." May looked up at him, her face wet. "Thank you, Mr. Walker. Thank you for what you've done for them. They're good children. They made it easy." She took his hand and held it tight. "No, they're good because you made them feel safe. That's everything." May Holloway stayed for 3 days. She slept in the spare room that had once been Annabelle's sewing room, and she filled it with the quiet presence of a woman who had learned to take up little space. She helped with the chores, washing dishes, mending socks, shelling peas for supper. She sat with Emma while she painted, teaching her how to mix colors to get the right shade of sky. She followed Noah to the barn and let him introduce her to every animal, one by one, and she remembered each name. And she spent hours with Lily, sitting on the porch swing or walking along the creek, talking about her mother. It was on the second evening that May found Ethan mending a harness in the barn. She stood in the doorway, the lantern light casting her shadow long across the hay. "Mr. Walker, can we talk?" He set down the awl. "Yes, ma'am." She walked over and sat on an overturned bucket, her hands folded in her lap. "I want to tell you something, and I want you to hear me out before you say anything. All right? I came here ready to fight for those children. I thought I was going to have to prove to you that I had a right to them, that blood meant something. But I've been here 2 days, and I've watched you with them. I've seen the way Lily looks at you. I've seen the way Noah climbs into your lap without thinking. I've seen Emma paint sunflowers on your barn because she knows you'll smile when you see them." She paused. Her voice was rough. "They're yours, Mr. Walker, not by blood but by every measure that matters. I'm not going to fight you. I'm not going to ask the court to reconsider. I'm going to go back to Beaumont, and I'm going to write them letters, and I'm going to visit once or twice a year, and I'm going to be grateful that my sister's children found a man like you." Ethan looked down at his hands. They were rough and scarred. calloused from years of work. They were the hands of a man who had buried his wife and built a life out of the pieces. "Thank you, ma'am. That means more than I can say." "You don't have to thank me. You just have to keep being who you are." She stood up and walked to the door. Then she turned back. "There's one more thing. Raymond Burke escaped from the county jail 3 days ago." The world stopped. Ethan's hands went cold. "He broke out with the help of a man on the outside. The sheriff is looking for him, but they don't know where he's gone. I thought you should know." "When did this happen?" "The day after the hearing. I didn't say anything because I didn't want to scare the children. But you need to be ready." Ethan stood up slowly. He picked up the Winchester that was leaning against the wall and checked the load. "Thank you for telling me. Mr. Walker, be careful. That man has nothing left to lose." "He never did, ma'am. That's what made him dangerous." May left the next morning. She stood at the gate with her wagon, hugging each child in turn, pressing a small folded bill into Lily's hand that Lily tried to give back and finally, crying, accepted. She promised to write. She promised to return for Christmas. She climbed into her wagon and drove away, and the children stood at the gate waving until the dust settled and the road was empty. And then there was the waiting. The next week passed under a cloud of watchfulness. Ethan slept with the rifle beside his bed. The dog patrolled the yard at night, his ears swiveling at every sound. Lily checked the locks twice before going to bed, and she kept the screwdriver under her pillow where she could reach it without opening her eyes. But Raymond didn't come. The days stretched into a week, then 2. The frost hardened into ice. The cattle grew thick winter coats. The first snow fell, a light dusting that melted by midday, and still there was no sign of him. Ethan began to hope that he had fled the state, that he was lying low in some saloon in another county, that he had given up. But hope was a dangerous thing, and he didn't let himself hold it too tightly. It was on a Thursday morning, when the sky was the color of old pewter and the wind had a bite that promised a hard winter, that the dog started barking. Not the alarm bark, but a different one, excited, almost friendly. Ethan stepped onto the porch and saw a wagon coming up the road, driven by a woman he didn't recognize. She pulled up at the gate and climbed down. She was young, maybe 25, with a baby on her hip and a toddler clinging to her skirt. Her face was thin and tired, but her eyes were bright. "Mr. Walker?" "That's me. My name is Ruth Calloway, from Galveston. I wrote Lily a letter a few months back." Ethan's breath caught. "Ruby's sister?" "No, sir. I'm the one Ruby wrote about. I'm the girl she said she was praying for." She shifted the baby to her other hip. "I know it's a long way to come unannounced, but I had to see her. I had to thank her in person." Ethan called Lily to the door. She came out wiping her hands on her apron, and when she saw the young woman standing at the gate, she stopped. "Ruth? You're Lily?" They stared at each other across the yard. Then Ruth Calloway started to cry. She set the baby down and walked forward, and Lily met her halfway, and they stood in the middle of the road, holding each other while the wind whipped around them, and the toddler stared up at them with wide, curious eyes. "You saved my life," Ruth whispered. "When I heard your testimony, I found the courage to tell the truth. My grandmother came for me. I'm safe, I'm whole, and I owe it all to you." Lily shook her head. "You did it yourself. I just spoke." "You spoke when no one else would. That's everything." They stayed for the afternoon. Ruth's grandmother was waiting for her at a boarding house in town, but she had insisted on making the detour. She had brought a jar of honey and a quilt her grandmother had sewn, and she had brought pictures of her new life, a small house by the sea, a garden, the baby's first steps. She showed them to Lily as if they were sacred objects, and Lily looked at each one with the reverence they deserved. Before she left, Ruth took Lily's hands. "I have a message from the others." "The others?" "4 of us. We all got out because of you. We all found our way to safety, and we all want you to know that you are not alone. You have sisters you've never met, scattered across this state, and we will never forget what you did." Lily couldn't speak. She just nodded, her eyes wet, her hands trembling. Ruth kissed her cheek. "Be happy, Lily Walker. You've earned it." She climbed into the wagon and drove away, the baby waving a chubby hand from her lap. Lily stood at the gate until the wagon disappeared, and then she turned and walked back to the house, where Ethan was waiting on the porch. "Pa." "Yeah, sweetheart. I think I'm going to be all right." He put his arm around her and pulled her close. "I know you are, Lily. I've known it since the night I found you." The winter settled in earnest. Snow fell and stayed, blanketing the ranch in white. The creek froze over, the cattle huddled in the barn, and the children spent long afternoons by the fire, reading and drawing and playing checkers with buttons carved from wood. They celebrated Thanksgiving with a chicken that Noah had named Henrietta and then refused to eat after he learned the name. They hung mistletoe that Emma had painted on a piece of barn board because real mistletoe was too hard to find. And all through the winter, there was no sign of Raymond. The sheriff came by once a week to check in. He had men watching the roads, he said. He had sent word to every county within 100 miles. There was a reward for Raymond's capture, dead or alive. But the weeks passed, and the trail grew cold, and the sheriff began to hope that Raymond had finally done something smart and left the state. Ethan didn't share that hope. He kept the rifle loaded, he kept the dog close, and he watched the road. Christmas Eve came clear and cold, the stars hard and bright in the black sky. The children had decorated the parlor with strings of popcorn and paper snowflakes that Emma had cut with painstaking care. Noah had made a small wooden horse in the barn, a lopsided thing with legs that didn't quite match, and he had wrapped it in an old rag and hidden it under his bed. Lily had embroidered a handkerchief for Ethan with the letters E.W. in blue thread, the stitches small and uneven, but full of love. They sat around the fire after supper, the stockings hung on the mantel, the smell of pine and wood smoke filling the room. Ethan read the Christmas story from the Bible that the preacher's wife had given them, his voice rough and slow, stumbling over the names he couldn't pronounce. The children listened without fidgeting, their faces lit by the firelight. When he finished, no one spoke for a long moment. Then Emma leaned against his arm and said, "This is the best Christmas I ever had." "Better than with Mama?" Lily asked. Emma thought about it. Different, but good different. Noah had crawled into Ethan's lap and was already half asleep, his thumb in his mouth, his eyes fluttering closed. Lily sat on the floor with her back against the sofa, the firelight catching her face, and she looked at peace. "Pa," she said. "Yeah, sweetheart." "Thank you." "For what?" "For opening the door." He didn't answer. He couldn't. He just looked at her, at the three of them, at the fire that was warm, and the stockings that were full, and the house that was no longer empty. And he thought about the night in the barn, the rain, the screwdriver, the girl who had pointed it at his heart. He thought about the long road they had traveled to get here, and the road that still lay ahead. He didn't know if Raymond was out there, waiting in the dark. He didn't know if the winter would be hard, or the spring would bring flood, or the summer would bring drought. But he knew this. He had a family. He had a reason to wake up in the morning. And he had a love in his heart that had been dead for 9 years and was now alive, burning as bright as the fire on the hearth. He set the Bible down and pulled Emma closer. Noah stirred in his lap and settled deeper. "Merry Christmas," he said. And for the first time in 9 years, he meant it. The winter deepened after Christmas, settling over the ranch like a heavy blanket that muffled sound and blurred the edges of the world. January came in with a blizzard that lasted 3 days, piling snow against the doors and icing the windows so thick that the morning light came through blue and strange. The children stayed inside, playing games by the fire, reading books from the small shelf that Ethan had built in the parlor. Emma drew a mural across the entire wall of the kitchen, a field of sunflowers so bright that it seemed to warm the room even on the coldest days. Noah learned to whittle, producing a menagerie of lopsided animals that he arranged on the windowsill in a parade that grew longer by the week. Lily had taken to writing letters. She wrote to Ruth Calloway in Galveston, to the other girls whose names she had learned through Mr. Hadley's correspondence, to her Aunt May in Beaumont. She wrote long letters full of news about the ranch and the animals and the small daily victories of her new life. She wrote short letters full of questions about the world beyond the river road. And she received letters in return, which she read aloud at the supper table, her voice warm with the connection to a world that had once seemed closed to her. Ethan watched her grow. It was not a fast process, healing never was, but it was steady. She laughed more easily now, a full laugh that came from her belly and surprised even her sometimes. She stopped flinching when a door slammed. She stopped checking the windows before she sat down to eat. She still kept the screwdriver under her pillow, but she no longer carried it with her during the day. It was a small thing, but it was everything. The thaw came in the second week of February. The snow melted into mud, and the creek swelled with runoff, and the air carried the smell of wet earth and the promise of spring. Ethan spent long days mending fences that had been damaged by the weight of the snow, and Noah followed him like a shadow, handing him nails and asking questions about everything that moved. It was on a Friday afternoon, when the sun was warm enough to take off a coat for the first time in months, that the dog started barking. It was not the friendly bark for a visitor. It was the low, continuous bark of warning. Ethan straightened from the fence post he was repairing. He scanned the road, the tree line, the barn. Nothing moved. But the dog kept barking, his hackles raised, his eyes fixed on the bend in the river where the cottonwoods grew thick. "Pa?" Noah's voice was small. "Inside, son. Now." Noah ran for the house without looking back. Ethan picked up the Winchester that he had leaned against the fence and walked toward the gate. The dog fell in beside him, growling low in his chest. He stood at the gate for a long time, watching the tree line. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the yard. The wind rustled the dead leaves that still clung to the oaks. And then he saw it, a flicker of movement, just beyond the bend. A shape, a man. He raised the rifle. "Come on out." "I see you." The shape didn't move. Then it stepped forward, slow, into the light. It was not Raymond. It was a man Ethan didn't recognize, tall, thin, with a beard that needed trimming and clothes that looked like they had been slept in for a week. "Mr. Walker?" The man's voice was rough, hesitant. "That's me. Who are you?" "Name's Wallace. I'm a deputy from over in Claiborne County. I've been riding 3 days to find you." Ethan lowered the rifle a fraction. "What's your business?" The deputy walked closer, his hands visible, his face tired and strained. "It's about Raymond Burke. He was spotted 2 days ago heading this way. He's got a horse and a rifle, and he's been talking loud in saloons about settling accounts. The sheriff in Claiborne sent me to warn you." Ethan's grip tightened on the rifle. "How far out is he?" "Could be here by nightfall, could be here by morning. He's moving slow, but he's moving steady." Lily had come to the door. She stood in the frame, her face pale, her hands clasped in front of her. She had heard. "Lily, get the children to the root cellar." "We ain't going to the root cellar again." "Lily." "No, we've been hiding from him long enough. If he comes, we face him together." Ethan looked at her. Her chin was lifted, her eyes steady. She was not the same girl who had cowered in a barn with a screwdriver. She was something else now, something stronger. "All right," he said, "but you stay behind me, no matter what." She nodded. The deputy stayed for supper, eating a bowl of stew in silence, while the children watched him with wide eyes. He was a quiet man, worn down by years of riding between counties, and he did not offer comfort or false hope. He simply told them what he knew, and then left, riding off into the dusk, with a promise to send help if he could. The night settled in like a held breath. Ethan moved through the house, checking the locks, the windows, the loads in his rifle, and the shotgun. He set the lanterns low so the house would not be a beacon in the dark. The dog lay by the front door, his ears twitching at every sound. The children did not sleep. They sat together in the parlor, Emma curled into Lily's side, Noah on Lily's lap, all three of them wrapped in the quilt that Annabelle had sewn. Ethan sat in the rocking chair with the rifle across his knees, facing the door. The hours crawled past. The moon rose and set. The wind picked up, rattling the windows, and then died down again. The fire burned low, and Ethan did not add more wood because he wanted the dark. It was just past 3 in the morning when the dog lifted his head. He did not bark. He growled, a low, sustained sound that vibrated through the floorboards. Ethan was on his feet before the growl had fully formed. He crossed to the window and parted the curtain a fraction of an inch. The yard was silver under the moon. The shadows of the cottonwoods stretched across the ground like the fingers of a hand. And at the gate, a man stood. He was alone. No horse, no hired guns, just a man in a dark coat, his hat pulled low, his hands empty. Ethan recognized the shape of him. He had seen it in his nightmares for months. "Lily," he said, his voice low, "take them to the back room. Don't come out until I call." "Pa, do it." She hesitated. Then she took Emma's hand, lifted Noah onto her hip, and led them through the kitchen to the small room at the back of the house where the canned goods were stored. She closed the door behind her. Ethan walked to the front door. He unlocked it. He pulled it open and stepped out onto the porch. Raymond Burke stood at the gate, his hands at his sides, his face a mask of exhaustion and something that might have been despair. He looked thinner than Ethan remembered. His clothes hung loose on his frame. His eyes were hollow. "Walker. Burke. I ain't got a gun. I don't care. I come to talk. Talk's over. Get off my land." Raymond didn't move. He stood there, swaying slightly, his breath misting in the cold air. "I ain't got nowhere to go. Not my problem. I know I done terrible things. I know I hurt them children. I know I sold Lily like she was a piece of livestock. I know all of it." His voice cracked. "I've been living with it. I've been running from it. And I can't run no more." Ethan said nothing. His finger rested on the trigger guard. "I come to say I'm sorry. I know it don't mean nothing. I know sorry don't fix what I broke. But I had to say it. I had to say it to her face. You ain't getting anywhere near her. I know I ain't. But I wanted her to know that I know what I done, and that I'm going to turn myself in. I'm going to go to the sheriff in the morning. I'm going to serve my time. And when I get out, I'm going to be a different man, or I'm going to die trying." Ethan stared at him. The words were the right words, but he had heard right words before, from men who had meant them, and from men who had not. He didn't know which kind Raymond was. "Turn around," Ethan said. "Walk back down that road. If you're still walking in the morning, I'll believe you." Raymond nodded slowly. He turned. He walked to the gate, opened it, and stepped through. He did not look back. He walked down the river road, his figure growing smaller and smaller in the moonlight, until he disappeared around the bend. Ethan stood on the porch until the dog stopped growling. Then he went inside. Lily was waiting in the kitchen, her hand on the screwdriver tucked into her apron pocket. "Is he gone?" "He's gone. He says he's turning himself in." "Do you believe him?" Ethan thought about it. He thought about the hollow eyes, the trembling hands, the voice that had cracked with something that sounded like genuine remorse. He thought about the man who had driven 3 children into a stranger's barn, and the man who had stood at his gate with nothing left. "I don't know," he said. "But we'll find out in the morning." They didn't sleep that night. They sat together in the parlor, the fire rebuilt, the lamps lit, the dog at their feet. Ethan held Emma in his lap. Lily leaned against his shoulder. Noah was curled up between them, his thumb in his mouth, his eyes finally closing as the first gray light of dawn seeped through the curtains. At sunrise, Ethan rode into town. He found the sheriff at his office, just unlocking the door. He told him about the visit, about Raymond's promise. The sheriff listened without interrupting. When Ethan finished, he nodded slowly. "I'll send a deputy out to look for him. If he's serious, he'll be on the road. If he's not, we'll find him." Ethan nodded. He rode home. The days that followed were strange and uncertain. There was no sign of Raymond. The sheriff's deputy found footprints on the river road leading south, but no body, no camp, no trace of a man who had promised to turn himself in. The search continued, but the trail grew cold. The children slowly relaxed. Emma went back to her painting. Noah went back to following Ethan. Lily went back to her letters. But there was a new quietness in the house, a watchfulness that did not fade. Spring came, tentative at first, then full and green. The pastures turned emerald, the creek ran clear. The calves were born, one after another, stumbling into the world on wobbly legs. The children helped with the births, their hands gentle and sure, their voices soft with wonder. And then, in the 3rd week of April, a letter arrived. It was from the sheriff of Claiborne County. It said that Raymond Burke had turned himself in at the county seat 3 weeks after he had stood at Ethan's gate. He had walked into the sheriff's office with his hands up and his head down, and he had confessed to everything. He was awaiting trial. He would not be seeing the outside of a prison cell for a very long time. Ethan read the letter at the kitchen table. Lily sat across from him, watching his face. "Pa? It's over, sweetheart. He turned himself in. He's in jail. He ain't coming back." Lily stared at him for a long moment. Then she stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the yard where Emma was chasing a chicken and Noah was teaching the dog to fetch. "Over?" she said. "Over." She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just stood there, her hands resting on the windowsill, her breath slow and steady. And then she turned and looked at him, and her eyes were clear. "Then let's have supper," she said. That night they ate together at the kitchen table. They talked about the calves and the garden and the school play that Emma was going to be in. They laughed at a story Noah told about the rooster chasing the dog. They passed the biscuits and the butter and the jam that Mrs. McAllister had sent over. And when the meal was done, Lily cleared the plates without being asked, and Ethan sat in his chair and watched her. She moved through the kitchen with a grace that had not been there before, not the grace of a girl who had learned to be invisible, but the grace of a girl who had learned to take up space. She paused at the sink, a plate in her hand. She looked out the window at the darkening yard, at the stars beginning to appear in the purple sky. "Pa?" "Yeah, sweetheart." "Tomorrow, can we go to the creek?" "Of course we can." She nodded. She turned back to the dishes, and Ethan watched her, and he felt something settle in his chest. Not relief, not joy, something quieter. Something like peace. The next morning they packed a basket with bread and cheese and apples, and they walked to the creek. The water was high from the spring melt, running fast and clear over the stones. Emma took off her shoes and waded in, gasping at the cold. Noah threw sticks into the current and watched them race downstream. Lily sat on the flat rock where she had sat before, her feet in the water, her face lifted to the sun. Ethan sat on the bank and watched them. The dog splashed in the shallows, barking at nothing. A kingfisher dove from a branch and came up with a minnow. The sun climbed higher, warm on his face. Lily looked over at him. "Pa?" "Yeah." "Thank you." "For what?" "For not giving up on us." He looked at her, at the sunlight catching her hair, at the peace in her face that had been so long coming. "Lily Walker," he said, "I will never give up on you. Not in this life, not in the next." She smiled. It was a full smile, a real smile, the kind that reached her eyes and stayed there. And they sat by the creek, the four of them, and watched the water run past, carrying with it the last of the shadows that had clung to them for so long. That evening, as the sun set and the children were putting on their nightclothes, a knock came at the door. It was soft, hesitant, the knock of someone who was not sure they were welcome. Ethan opened the door. Standing on the porch, his hat in his hands, his face thin and tired, was Raymond Burke. He was not in chains. He was not accompanied by a deputy. He was alone. "Walker," he said, "I need to see Lily." The door stood open, and the night air rushed in cold and sharp, carrying the smell of wet earth and the distant promise of rain. Raymond Burke filled the frame, his hat clutched in his hands, his face gaunt and shadowed in the lantern light. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out and left to dry in the sun. "Walker, I need to see Lily." Ethan stepped forward, blocking the doorway. His hand found the Winchester where he had leaned it against the wall. "You got no right to ask that. I know I ain't got rights. I know I lost every one of 'em. But I come here to do what I should have done a long time ago." His voice cracked. "I come to look her in the eye and tell her I'm sorry. And then I'm going to the sheriff. I already sent word." He's on his way. Behind Ethan, footsteps on the stairs. He didn't turn. He knew the sound of her. "It's all right, Pa." Lily came down the stairs barefoot, still in the dress she had worn to supper. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, and her face was calm in a way that made Ethan's chest ache. She walked past him and stood in the doorway, facing Raymond. He took a step back when he saw her. His hands shook. "Lily." "Raymond, I ain't here to take you. I ain't here to cause trouble. I come to say I'm sorry. I know it ain't enough. I know sorry don't fix nothing, but I had to say it. I had to say it to your face." Lily looked at him. She did not flinch. She did not look away. She stood there in the doorway of the house that had become her home, and she faced the man who had tried to break her. "I've been thinking about you a lot," she said. "Not every day anymore, but sometimes. I used to have nightmares about you. I used to wake up screaming, but that stopped. I'm glad." "I ain't finished," she took a breath. "I used to be afraid of you. I used to think you was the strongest thing in the world because you could hurt me and I couldn't stop you. But I ain't afraid anymore." "You know why?" Raymond shook his head. "Because I found out what real strength looks like. It ain't hitting somebody smaller than you. It ain't selling a child for $50. Real strength is getting up every day when everything inside you wants to give up. Real strength is taking care of people who can't take care of themselves. Real strength is what my pa does every single morning when he gets out of bed." She pointed at Ethan. "He never raised a hand to me. He never had to. He kept us safe by being good. That's strength. And you ain't got it." Raymond's face crumpled. He sank to his knees in the dirt of the yard, his hat falling from his hands, his shoulders shaking. I know I ain't. I know I'm nothing. I know I destroyed everything I ever touched. But I wanted you to hear me say it. I wanted you to know that I know." Lily watched him for a long moment. Then she stepped off the porch and walked to where he knelt. She stopped a few feet away. "I forgive you," she said. Raymond looked up, his face wet. "I forgive you, Raymond, not because you deserve it, but because I don't want to carry the weight of hating you anymore. It's too heavy. I got better things to carry now." She turned and walked back to the porch. She climbed the steps and stood beside Ethan. "Close the door, Pa." He closed the door. They heard the sheriff's wagon pull up a few minutes later. They heard voices, low and muffled. They heard the wagon drive away. And then there was silence. Lily stood at the window, watching the dust settle on the road. "It's over," she said. "It's over, sweetheart." She turned and looked at the kitchen, where Emma had fallen asleep on the rag rug, and Noah was curled up in the rocking chair with the dog at his feet. The fire crackled. The kettle hummed on the stove. "Supper's getting cold," she said. They sat down together, the four of them, and they ate. The trial was quick. Raymond Burke pled guilty to all charges. He was sentenced to 20 years in the state prison in Huntsville. The judge looked at him as he read the sentence, and he said, "Mr. Burke, there is a girl in this county who will grow up to be a woman you could never have dreamed of being. I hope you think about that every day." Raymond was led away in chains. He did not look back. The news spread through the county like a slow tide. People came by the ranch to offer their congratulations, to shake Ethan's hand, to pat Lily on the head and tell her she was brave. She accepted their words with a grace that surprised her. She had learned to receive kindness without flinching. May Holloway came for a visit in early May, bringing a trunk full of preserves and a bolt of fabric for new dresses. She stayed a week, helping with the garden, teaching Emma how to sew a straight seam, sitting with Lily on the porch swing and talking about her mother until the stars came out. On her last night, May took Lily aside. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. "Your mama gave me this before she married Raymond. She said, if anything ever happens to me, I want Lily to have this. I kept it all these years, waiting for the right time." Lily opened the pouch. Inside was a silver locket, tarnished with age, with a tiny photograph inside. A woman with kind eyes and Lily's chin. "Your mama when she was 19, May said. Lily held the locket in her palm. She didn't cry. She just closed her fingers around it and pressed it to her chest. "Thank you, Aunt May. Your mama would be so proud of you, Lily." So proud. May left the next morning, and Lily stood at the gate with the locket around her neck, watching the wagon disappear down the river road. She touched the silver metal and felt the warmth of it against her skin. June came in with a heat wave that turned the pastures brown and sent the cattle to the shade of the cottonwoods. The children spent their days by the creek, wading in the cool water, catching tadpoles in jars. Noah learned to swim, splashing inelegantly but joyfully. Emma painted the creek from every angle, capturing the light as it shifted through the leaves. Lily turned 14 in the third week of June. There was no grand celebration. Ethan had never been good at parties, but Mrs. McAllister brought a cake, and the preacher's wife brought a book of poetry, and old Henrietta Boggs brought a hand-stitched quilt that she had been working on for 2 years. The children ate cake on the porch, their faces smeared with frosting, and they sang, "Happy Birthday," off-key and laughing. Lily opened her presents. From Emma, a painting of a sunrise over the barn. From Noah, a wooden horse so crooked it looked like it was about to collapse. From Ethan, a writing desk. It was not a store-bought desk. He had built it himself, in the barn, in the evenings after the children had gone to bed. It was made of pine, sanded smooth, with a small drawer and a sloped top for writing. He had carved her initials into the corner, L.W. Lily traced the letters with her finger. "Pa." "Yeah, sweetheart." "I don't have words." "You don't need 'em." She sat down at the desk, right there on the porch, and she wrote a letter. It was to Ruby Calloway, to tell her about the cake and the locket and the desk. She wrote until the light faded and the mosquitoes came out, and then she closed the ink bottle and carried the desk up to her room, where she placed it by the window where she could see the creek. That summer was the longest and the shortest of Ethan's life. The days stretched out, golden and slow, filled with the sounds of children laughing and chickens clucking and the distant lowing of cattle. The nights were cool and the stars were bright, and he sat on the porch with his coffee and listened to the quiet breathing of the house. He thought about Annabelle. He thought about the baby girl who had never drawn a breath. He thought about the long years of solitude that had stretched out before him like a desert. And he thought about the night 3 children had crawled out of his barn and changed everything. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and purple, Lily came and sat beside him on the porch steps. She was holding a piece of paper. "Pa, I wrote something. I want to read it to you." "Go ahead." She unfolded the paper. She had written it in her careful hand, the letters neat and even. "The night I met you, I was holding a screwdriver. It was the only thing I had left that could protect us. I didn't know that the real protection was already waiting for me, standing in the rain with a shotgun and a heart so big it could hold 3 broken children and never break. You taught me that strength is not the same as cruelty. You taught me that a man can be gentle and still be the strongest person in the room. You taught me that home is not a place. It's the people who will stand at the door and wait for you to come back. I used to think that my story was over. I thought it ended in a barn, in the dark, with nothing but a rusted tool in my hand. But you opened the door, and the story kept going. I don't know what comes next, but I know I'll face it from this porch, with this family, with you behind me. Thank you for finding us." She folded the paper and looked at him. Her eyes were wet, but she was smiling. Ethan could not speak. He reached out and pulled her into a hug, and he held her for a long time. The rest of the summer passed in a blur of small moments. There was the time Noah fell out of the hayloft and landed in a pile of straw, unharmed but covered in dust, and Ethan had to pretend to be angry while the boy grinned up at him with hay in his teeth. There was the time Emma's painting of a sunflower won a blue ribbon at the county fair, and she carried it around for a week like a trophy. There was the time Lily rode a horse for the first time, a gentle mare named Daisy, and she sat so tall and straight that Ethan had to look away. And there was the day, in late August, when the sheriff came by to say that Raymond had died in prison. A fever, they said, quick and quiet. He had been buried in the prison cemetery. Ethan told Lily that evening, after supper. She listened without changing expression. Then she nodded. "Good," she said. "Now I can stop looking over my shoulder." She went up to her room. She opened the drawer where the screwdriver still lay, wrapped in a piece of cloth. She carried it downstairs and walked out to the barn. Ethan followed at a distance, watching. She stood in the barn, in the same spot where he had found her. She looked at the screwdriver in her hand. Then she knelt down and placed it on the beam where she had hidden all those months ago. She stood up. She walked out of the barn. "Pa?" "Yeah, sweetheart." "I don't need it anymore." He nodded. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. September came and school started again. Lily walked Emma to the door on the first day, and she did not check the windows before she left. She sat in her classroom and opened her books and did not flinch when the door slammed. She was learning to be ordinary, and there was a special kind of bravery in that. One evening, as the leaves began to turn and the air carried the first hint of autumn, Ethan found Lily sitting at her desk, writing by the light of a candle. He knocked on the open door. "Come in." He sat on the edge of her bed. "What are you writing?" "Another letter, to Ruby. She's getting married next spring. She asked me to come." "Are you going to go?" Lily looked up. "I think I am. I think I need to see her, to see what I helped save." "That's a good reason." She set down the pen. "Pa, can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Do you think Mama would have liked me?" Ethan felt the words hit him like a blow to the chest. He took a moment before he answered. "Lily, your mama, Sarah, she was the kindest person I ever met. She loved fiercely and completely. And if she could see you now, see what you've become, she would be so proud that her heart would burst." Lily looked down at her hands. "I hope so. I know so." The wedding was in April, in Galveston. Ethan drove Lily to the train station, Emma and Noah in the back of the wagon. They stood on the platform as the train came in, a great black engine hissing steam. Lily was wearing a new dress that Mrs. McAllister had helped her sew. She carried a small bag with her locket and her letters, and the preacher's wife's Bible. "I'll be back in a week," she said. "We'll be here." She hugged Emma, then Noah. Then she turned to Ethan. "Pa." "Yeah, sweetheart. I'll write every day." "You don't have to." "I will anyway." She hugged him, quick and tight, and then she climbed onto the train. She found a seat by the window and waved as the train pulled out. Ethan stood on the platform with Noah on his hip and Emma's hand in his, watching the train disappear around the bend. "Pa," Noah said, "is she coming back?" "Yeah, son, she'll always come back." The week stretched out longer than he expected. The house felt too quiet. The barn felt too empty. Noah asked every morning if Lily was coming home that day, and Emma drew pictures of the train arriving at the station. On the 5th day, a letter came, written on stationery from a Galveston boarding house. "Pa," it read, "Ruby is beautiful. Her husband is a fisherman with hands like leather and eyes like the sea. She told me that when she heard my testimony, she was hiding in a shed behind her stepfather's house, and she decided right then that she would run. She ran that night. She walked for 6 days before she found her grandmother's house. She said I saved her life, but I think we saved each other. I miss you. I miss Emma and Noah. I miss the creek and the chickens, and the way the sun hits the barn in the morning. I never thought I would miss any of that, but I do. Coming home. Tell Noah I got him a present from the sea. Your daughter, Lily." Ethan read the letter 3 times. Then he folded it and put it in his pocket, over his heart. The station was crowded when the train came in. Noah was jumping up and down. Emma was clutching a bouquet of wildflowers that had wilted in the heat. Ethan stood at the front, his hat in his hands. The train stopped. The doors opened. Passengers streamed out, strangers with suitcases and hats and tired faces. And then Lily stepped off the train. She was wearing the same dress, but she looked different. Taller, more sure of herself. She carried a small shell in her hand, which she pressed into Noah's palm before he could even speak. "I brought you the ocean," she said. Noah stared at the shell. Then he threw his arms around her. She looked up at Ethan. "I'm home, Pa." "Welcome home, sweetheart." They walked back to the wagon together, the 4 of them, and they drove home through the long spring evening. The sun was setting over the cottonwoods, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. The dog met them at the gate, barking and wagging his tail. That night, after supper, they sat on the porch. Lily told them about Galveston, the smell of the salt air, the sound of the waves, the way the seabirds cried at dawn. She told them about Ruby's wedding, and the cake that had 3 tiers, and the dancing that went on until midnight. Noah fell asleep in Ethan's lap. Emma leaned against Lily's shoulder, her eyes drooping. "Pa," Lily said. "Yeah. I used to think that when my mama died, the world stopped being good. I thought there was nothing left but surviving. But I was wrong." "What changed your mind?" She looked at him. "You opened a door." Ethan looked at the stars coming out, one by one, in the vast Texas sky. He looked at the barn where it had all started. He looked at the house that was no longer empty. He looked at the 3 children who had given him back something he thought he had lost forever. "Lily," he said, "I spent 9 years thinking that I had nothing left to give. And then you showed up in my barn with a screwdriver and a broken heart, and you gave me everything." She took his hand. They sat together in the dark, the four of them, a family bound not by blood but by choice, by love, by the simple act of opening a door when the world had taught them to keep it closed. The crickets sang, the stars wheeled overhead, the dog sighed in his sleep, and Ethan Walker, who had once been a lonely man in an empty house, became a father to 3 children who had saved him as surely as he had saved them. This is Clint Dawson, and you've been listening to Frontier Heart Audio. Until next time, keep your heart open and your trails safe.